Welcome to the fantasy audiobook. Sign in at the end of the world. Devour the Fire Lord at the beginning. Chapter 61. At night, there were stars, and the summer evening breeze blew with a cool breath over the entire dark city. This place seems to have fallen asleep completely. In the middle of the city, a few wisps of white smoke were entwined with sparks rising in the sky, injecting a bit of life into this seemingly lifeless city. Several bonfires were set up in the open square, next to a dozen military green camping tents. Dozens of awakened people of different ages and clothes were sitting around the campfire, where they were discussing the secret plan after convening the search team. Miu-Chu sensed that the members of these search teams were B-level at last, and there were more than a dozen of them who had reached A-level. Then, Miu-Chu looked at the white-haired man in a white suit with an indifferent expression standing in front of him, Ji Yufeng, the captain of the law enforcement team. The supernatural energy fluctuations in Ji Yufeng's body are more intense than those of others. If the supernatural energy in the bodies of these A-level awakeners is like a pool of warm water, then what is contained in Ji Yufeng's body is like a clear spring. He is an S-level awakened person. Miu-Chu narrowed her eyes slightly, and even the smile on her face faded a lot. For some reason, after seeing Ji Yufeng, the fire demon consciousness in his body became agitated, and a nameless anger suddenly rose up to the bottom of his heart. Ji Yufeng stood next to the tent and looked at a middle-aged man next to him. The middle-aged man understood instantly, stretched out his hands and raised them around. A purple light curtain visible to the naked eye suddenly rose from the periphery of the square, and gradually came together to form a purple light mask surrounding the square. Miu-Chu used her telekinesis tentacles to test and realized that this purple light curtain was actually made of some special spiritual energy. The middle-aged man who emits a purple light curtain explained to everyone. This light curtain is my special power. It can detect all unknown signals and life forms that enter the barrier, and can also provide a certain degree of defense when necessary. As he said that, he scanned the crowd again. Of course, it can also detect the entry and exit of people inside, including the transmission of internal signals. This sentence is a bit playful to say. An inexplicable color flashed in Miu-Chu's eyes, and she already had some guesses about the next plan. But I heard Ji Yufeng say, there is only one purpose for calling you here this time. That is to eliminate a pagan stronghold in Linan City. Heterologous Church. Why are those crazy people here? Once Ji Yufeng's words came out, it caused an uproar in the scene. The faces of many awakened people in the search team showed expressions of fear, hatred, or disgust. But without exception, it is easy to see from their reactions that they are full of rejection and disgust towards this heterologous religion. Miu-Chu looked at Weilinger with questioning eyes, but found that the eldest lady also showed an indignant look. Weilinger quietly explained to Miu-Chu, the heterogeneous religion is a terrorist organization composed of a group of paranoid and crazy awakened people after the outbreak of the apocalypse. They firmly believe that this doomsday is just a test from God to the world. We awakened people are just incomplete evolutions, and those zombie heretics who are completely mutated and have zombie sanity are the real New World rulers truly chosen by the Creator. Quote, is there such an organization? Miu-Chu rubbed her chin, with curiosity in her eyes. It's funny, isn't it? Weilinger smiled bitterly and said, these alien cult members worship powerful heretics, and even regard them as monsters as their masters, helping the heretics fight against the human base. They also continue to spread their crazy ideas in various safe zone bases, trying to assimilate those survivors who have been forced into desperation and worship the evil heretics with them. A bunch of bigoted lunatics worshipping heretics. Miu-Chu suddenly became interested in this alien church. I didn't expect that we would be dealing with this terrible organization this time. No wonder Ji Yufeng had to personally take action. Weilinger suddenly understood something. It seems that the fact that we were monitored by drones yesterday was probably the work of the alien cult. Fortunately, we ran fast. What those lunatics like to do most is to contribute powerful awakened people to the heretical raw food. Miu-Chu became interested and was about to continue asking, but found that the noisy awakened people around her suddenly became quiet. Miu-Chu noticed a sharp gaze directed at everyone. The sight that was mixed with coldness and sharpness immediately made everyone feel like they were falling into an ice cave. When the scene calmed down, Ji Yufeng pushed the frame on his nose, and a light screen flashed under his glasses, making it difficult to see his expression clearly. There is news that the heterogeneous cultists in Lenon City have gathered in a large hall called the Dadiandi Entertainment Club. There are probably dozens of people, but it cannot be ruled out that there are powerful heretics beyond the A level among them. As soon as this statement came out, everyone who was already on tenterhooks immediately became frightened again. Most of the heterogeneous sects have extreme personalities, and they will do anything to gain power. Some even use heretics to perform some sorcery in exchange for abilities. This is the reason why the heterogeneous religion is not tolerated by many survivor bases. But this time, many search teams did not dare to make any noise, for fear of being targeted by Ji Yufeng. In the eyes of some awakened people, Ji Yufeng is a more terrifying existence than the zombie heretic. Ji Yufeng then looked at everyone and said, "This time the law enforcement team will join forces with you all to act together, and we will definitely eradicate the alien church in Lenon City in one fell swoop." For some reason, the more he looked at Ji Yufeng, the more agitated the fire demon lord in his body became. At this moment, Chu Nan, who was wearing sunglasses and dressed in a coquettish manner, complimented, "With Brother Ji here this time, isn't it possible to capture a mere alien church? Don't underestimate this operation." The middle-aged man next to Ji Yufeng had a solemn look on his face and said solemnly, "It is very likely that there is an S-level heresy in the heterogeneous religion in Lenon City." This sentence made the atmosphere at the scene even heavier, but Chu Nan still looked indifferent. "It's just an S-class monster. It's not like our brother Ji has never caught it. The scary fire demon lord was so arrogant a few days ago. Is it different, or was he captured by brother Ji?" As soon as these words came out, Mu Chu's pupils shrank slightly and her mind was shaken. "I see." Mu Chu finally understood why the emotions belonging to the fire demon lord in her body were so agitated after seeing Ji Yufeng's face. The previous capture of the fire demon lord was actually due to Ji Yufeng. Mu Chu turned her head and slowly looked at the white-haired man with an indifferent expression, with amusement in his eyes. "If this is the case, then you have to find this place yourself." After Chu Nan mentioned the name of Fire Demon Lord, Ji Yufeng's cold face finally showed a touch of emotion. He glanced down at the position of his arm. There was a hideous scar extending to his shoulder, just a few inches away from tearing his neck apart. Ji Yufeng slowly explained, "Even capturing the Balrog consumes a lot of human resources in the base, and I cannot do it alone." When the Fire Demon Lord was mentioned, not only Ji Yufeng's expression was moved, but also the expressions of the searcher team around him changed drastically. The Fire Demon Lord has been entrenched outside the Jade Sea base for a long time, and his tyrannical strength is nothing less than a haze hanging over everyone's heads, especially when the search team goes out to explore resources. Although this terrifying S-class heretic was captured alive after a heavy price, it only took more than a month for this terrifying zombie monster to escape, once again becoming a psychological shadow for the search team members. Thinking that this mission was to fight against the demonic servants of the alien church, and that there would even be powerful S-level beings, this made the awakened ones present, who were only B-level on average, quite frightened. Chu Nan mentioned the name of Fire Demon Lord with the intention of cheering people up, but he didn't expect that it made the atmosphere even more depressing. Seeing that the atmosphere was getting more and more solemn, Chu Nan hurriedly said, "We have Brother Ji personally taking action this time. Are there any heretics that cannot be dealt with?" Everyone was stunned, and then they remembered that there was this powerful awakened person in front of them, known as the White God of Death. Ji Yufeng glanced at the many awakened people present. Wherever they looked, the search team members all cowered, fearing that they would be stared at by the White God of Death, but no one dared to look at him. "No, there is another person." Ji Yufeng looked at Mu Chu, who looked indifferent, and gave Ji Yufeng a meaningful smile. For some reason, Ji Yufeng felt a strange feeling for a moment. This feeling is like being suddenly targeted by a terrifying heretic monster. Ji Yufeng frowned, pushed up his eyes to hide his thoughts, and turned his thin body to face the many search team members. Under the illumination of the moonlight, his close-fitting white suit was highlighted even more brightly. Combined with Ji Yufeng's cold and pale face, he looked like the messenger of the undead who had walked out of endless purgatory. "This is a battle." Ji Yufeng's cold words reached everyone's ears. "It's a war that will definitely kill people." Words as cold as Ji Yufeng's expression echoed in the ears of the search team. "If you want to leave now, I will not force you to stay, but accordingly, all members who leave the team will have 100 merit points deducted. As soon as these words came out, all the search teams present had their pupils trembled and their hearts trembling slightly. After each team goes out to investigate, they will report the resources and intelligence they found to UHI's senior management, and the corresponding team will receive a reward called merit points. In addition to being able to exchange for crystal cores, weapons, and other common post-apocalyptic trading items, merit points can even be exchanged for information on some resource locations. It is a popular currency among the UHI-based search teams. It can be said that merit points are the basis for their search teams to make a living. Usually, you can earn more than a dozen merit points by performing a mission. This time, Ji Yufeng will deduct 100 points. Doesn't this cost the lives of search teams like them? Many awakened people looked at each other with hesitation on their faces. In the end, no one stood up from the team and chose to leave. There is no other reason. What is the purpose of these teams working so hard to search the urban wasteland? Isn't it just to live a good life in the apocalypse with the help of supernatural powers? Nowadays, merit points are more important than money and power before the apocalypse. How can we make them give up easily? Naturally, they dare not speak out in anger against such enforced tasks. After all, the executor is the famous white god of death. Who dares to let him, the captain of the law enforcement team, take advantage of him? You know, this white god of death treats awakened people several times more harshly than ordinary survivors. Ji Yufeng looked around and saw that no awakened person chose to leave. He gently held the black frame, his eyes under the light curtain were unusually cold. After a careful meeting and deployment, Ji Yufeng planned a thorough plan to wipe out the heterogeneous church stronghold in Lan'an City the next day. Located in a tall building in the center of Lan'an. Little lights flickered in the dim corridor. The sound of wheels turning came from the deepest part of the corridor, and several figures were revealed in the corners under the light. A man in red robe with a pale face and no trace of blood walked out from the depths of the corridor, followed by several figures in black robes. The most surprising thing was that several men in purple robes actually pulled a huge cart surrounded by iron fences, almost blocking the entire wide aisle. The cart is covered by a black curtain, making it difficult to see what's inside. The man in red robe was accompanied by a hunchbacked man in purple robe and hood. Are those people from UHI almost here? The man in red robe asked, his tone was flat and hoarse. The hooded man in purple robes beside him said, they are already summoning search teams from the surrounding area. It seems that they are going to take action for real this time. This time, the white god of death from UHI is leading the team. It's a bit dangerous. Having said that, the corners of the mouth under the purple hood were grinning upward. White death, it's really exciting, the man in red robe hummed, and a strange smile gradually appeared on his face. While the two were talking, they had already arrived in a large elevator shaft. Several men in black robes behind him also pulled up the cart covered with a curtain. The purple-hooded man slowly pressed the button on the underground floor. There was a ding sound on the top of the elevator and a flash of light flashed, and then it started to click and move. There is actually equipment to maintain power supply in the most dangerous center of the urban wasteland. As the elevator shaft slowly descended, the man in purple robe said to the man in red robe, the people above have begun to ask about the experimental results here. Experimental results. The man in red robe had a hoarse and dry voice, and a smile appeared on his pale mouth. I think this is the best moment to reveal the results of the experiment. The White Death will die here together with his team. There was another click, and the elevator shaft had reached the bottom. The man in red robe led the crowd out of the elevator shaft. In the dark underground parking lot, pairs of scarlet and bloodthirsty eyes were staring blankly ahead. The men next to him turned on the flashlight and saw that the owners of these scarlet eyes turned out to be terrifying zombies in ragged clothes and covered in blood. These zombies stood silently in a queue in the empty parking lot, suddenly looking like frozen wax figures. In the dark and humid environment, one can only see their dull, empty eyes and hideous and terrifying faces with the help of flashlight light. The man in red robe waved his hand and ordered, and the men in black robe behind him immediately understood and lifted the curtain of the steel cage. Immediately afterwards, an even more horrifying scene happened. Locked in this steel cage were a dozen disheveled, sallow-looking human survivors. The hands and feet of these human survivors were tied with thick ropes, and their mouths were blocked with tape. They looked frightened and had tears on their faces. Several black-robed men threw these survivors from the cage to the ground. A man in black robes took out a dagger from his waist and cut the arms of several survivors. Scarlet blood spurted out from the wound. The air was instantly filled with the strong smell of blood. The hundreds of zombies were instantly ignited with blood, and each of them looked fiercely at the dozen survivors who fell to the ground. But the strange thing is that even though saliva flows from the corners of the mouth and the blood in the depths of the pupils becomes more and more intense, these zombies do not move at all. Facing the delicacies delivered to their doorsteps, these man-eating monsters froze aside. It's as if it was artificially fixed in place. But then, the man in red robe gently snapped his fingers. Crack! In an instant, as if some mysterious switch was turned on, these zombies almost simultaneously launched an attack with claws and teeth, and the target was the dozen human survivors who fell on the ground. Hundreds of zombies waved their sharp claws and surrounded more than a dozen people with ferocious faces, as if they were devouring them. Blood splattered, screams continued, and in a moment there was only a large pool of blood left on the ground. But the men in red robes behind them seemed to be used to it, with sickly smiles on their faces. Look forward to the great feast that is about to be staged. The moonlight shrouded by dark clouds shone down, bringing a ray of light to the city that was plunged into darkness. The moonlight shines on this tall building, and the dim sign that has long been gathering dust is clearly written with 7 characters, Daishandy Entertainment Club. Miu Chu opened her eyes, only to find that she was tightly entangled by Chi-Chi like an octopus. The girl's delicate arms were clinging to Miu Chu's chest, and she was breathing softly like a mosquito. The girl's appearance is always so beautiful, but her sleeping posture is a bit unsightly. Miu Chu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She gently put the girl's jade arm aside with her backhand, and slowly stood up. It was already late at night, and the team was resting in a tent in the square. Ever since seeing Ji Yufeng today, Miu Chu's consciousness belonging to the fire demon lord became violent. It was not only an emotion of anger, but also contained a kind of crazy greed. That's right, the fire demon in the body is greedily opening its mouth, trying to devour Ji Yufeng's body, his blood, and his powers. This Ji Yufeng deserves to be called the White God of Death, and he can actually make the Balrog eager to devour him. Miu Chu would naturally settle the old score with the fire demon lord with Ji Yufeng, but before that, he had to arrive at the Dadiandi Entertainment Club and complete the tasks assigned to him by the system. Until then, it's better not to create extraneous problems. Miu Chu put on her clothes and walked out of the tent. The late summer night was already slightly cool. At this time, in the middle of the night, the camp was already silent, only the unburned bonfire was still flickering with sparks. Because of the protection of the purple light curtain that isolates the outside world, people can enjoy a moment of stability in the ruins of this city that is in crisis. Miu Chu, who had nothing to do, walked to the pavilion in the center of the square. The bright moonlight in the sky seems to be the only light illuminating this wasteland. Walking to the pavilion, Miu Chu found that there was already a beautiful figure here, with a curvy figure, extremely beautiful appearance, and an elegant and mature temperament all over her body. This person is the model of the Holy Mother in Miu Chu's heart, Dr. Lu Qingfei. But unlike the usually elegant and dignified Madonna Lu, concubine Lu Qing looked melancholy and lost her mind at the moment. Her slim back looked very thin, and there was a trace of tears hanging from the corners of her eyes. Seeing this, Miu Chu stepped forward and said with a smile, "What? Is Madonna so sentimental today?" Miu Chu walked over without paying attention to the sound of footsteps, but Lu Qingfei seemed to have just reacted and was startled by the sudden sound. After discovering that the visitor was Miu Chu, concubine Lu Qing breathed a sigh of relief, patted her chest, wiped the tears from her eyes, and replied, "It's Miu Chu, why don't you go to bed so late?" Sensing something strange about concubine Lu Qing, Miu Chu Xiao asked, "Why do you look so absent-minded?" Lu Qingfei hesitated for a moment, but still confessed to Miu Chu, "It's because of my fiancé." Miu Chu suddenly remembered that the base camp for the extermination of the heretic cult this time was at the Dadiandi Entertainment Club, and it was at the Dadiandi Entertainment Club that Lu Qingfei's husband disappeared. Now concubine Lu Qing's husband must have fallen into the hands of the cult. But she heard Lu Qingfei talking to herself, "He is the president of a company. We met in a lecture at the university. Miu Chu had nothing to do, so she simply listened to the story of Madonna Lu and made a toothpaste. The story is quite cliché. Basically it is that Gao Fushuai naturally pursues Bai Fumei, and then the two start talking about marriage. He left Yuhai City 3 days before the end of the world. I have never seen him since that day. And the day when the apocalypse breaks out, there is still 1 month left before the wedding we agreed on. Lu Qingfei said, but the tears in the corners of her eyes fell down unsatisfactorily. His character is too upright, and it must be extremely painful to fall into the hands of the heterogeneous religion. I am afraid that even life and death are unknown now. It can be seen that Lu Qingfei, a sentimental woman, is really worried about her husband's safety now. But Miu Chu naturally didn't care about this. What he really cared about was the power he got after arriving at the sign-in location. Miu Chu smiled slightly, took off her windbreaker and put it on concubine Lu Qing. Then, he said meaningfully, "Don't worry, you never know what the result will be until you get to the last step." Concubine Lu Qing thought Miu Chu's words were touched by her and she was trying to comfort herself. What she didn't expect was that this man who treated his enemies like a devil could actually have such a kind side. "Thank you, Miu Chu." Concubine Lu Qing had a look of emotion on her face. How could Miu Chu not see that Lu Qingfei misunderstood him, but he obviously didn't want to make any excuses on this matter. He turned to lean against the columns of the pavilion, looked up at the sky, and whispered, "I have an inexplicable feeling that tomorrow will be very interesting." A zombie monster that was as big as a gorilla and as strong as a gorilla rose from the ground, and suddenly trampled an ordinary zombie next to it under its feet. The ground made of asphalt stone sank deeply in an instant, and a pool of scarlet blood flowed out from the cracked ground. The giant zombie beat its chest and roared, then walked away with heavy steps. The smell of blood instantly irritated the surrounding zombies. Several zombies leaned towards the corpse in the cracks in the ground with ferocious faces. Suddenly, a black figure flashed past, knocking those zombies away in an instant. This turned out to be a mutated zombie with sharp knife-like claws. The mutated zombie was extremely fast, picking up the broken corpses on the ground and turning them into an afterimage and disappearing into the deep alley. Roar! A low groan of torn vocal cords came from the neighborhood. Groups of zombies are scattered all over the block, rubbing shoulders with each other, and there are also all kinds of weird things mixed in with them. After a night of fermentation, the zombie monsters that were originally sparse on the street due to the cleanup by the law enforcement team gathered a lot again. The streets in the city center are even more crowded with zombies. Their clothes were in tatters, covered with old blood stains, their faces were ferocious, their eye sockets were protruding, and some even had deformed bodies, as if they were ferocious beasts in the jungle that preyed on people. Woo! Buzz! Suddenly, the violent roar of the engine and the rolling sound of the wheels came from a distance, causing the gravel on the ground to tremble and flying sand and rocks. I saw dozens of dark green Hummer military vehicles driving on the street in the distance. More than a dozen army green Hummer jeeps were speeding along, and the vehicles also had traces of modification, just like steel beasts driving in the jungle. Behind a row of military vehicles, there were more than a dozen vehicles of different models. There are also well-armed off-road vehicles, luxurious and cool sports cars, a few galloping horses. What is even more ridiculous is that there are several huge and extremely fast yellow forklifts in the group of vehicles. The drivers inside are also wearing vests and overalls, just like migrant workers who have just left the construction site. The loud sound of rolling wheels instantly alerted the zombies on the entire street, and the hungry man-eating monsters immediately came out in groups, rushing towards the group of cars in the distance. Deep in the wide street, the black zombie heads were connected together. From a distance, they looked like a bloody wave rushing toward the convoy. At this moment, a row of square gun barrels rose above the military vehicle walking at the front of the vehicle. Boom! Thick smoke rose from the barrel, and a series of red shells sprayed out after a loud noise. Whoosh! Right in front of the corpse group, a huge mutated zombie was instantly hit by a cannonball. After a loud boom, thick black smoke and hot firelight shook the entire neighborhood. The remnant power of the explosion even spread for tens of meters, and the surrounding zombie heretics were attacked by the wave of shell explosions. In an instant, charred corpses and blood clots splashed into the sky. Instead of cowering, the remaining zombies were stimulated by the smell of blood in the air and rushed towards the group of cars waving their ferocious deformed bodies. Rush over. At this time, Ji Yufeng's emotionless and indifferent voice came from all the transmitters in the car. Almost at the same time as this order was issued, the front bumpers of more than a dozen military Humvees suddenly flipped into spiked steel bars. The speed of the tires was getting faster and faster. As the engines roared, the Humvee military vehicles rushed directly towards the tide of corpses in front of them, like a row of brave warriors charging into battle. The zombie monsters that were so ferocious and terrifying in the eyes of ordinary people seemed like paper in front of these steel beasts. The sharp thorns and spears instantly penetrated the fragile flesh of the zombies. The extreme collision was accompanied by tearing and cutting the body. The modified iron tires were like the tracks of a tank, easily crushing the rushing zombies. Thick smoke and blood mist jointly create a scene full of violent aesthetics. This scene really shocked the search team members at the rear. When a team of several people like them explores the ruins of the city, there is never a time when they don't hide their heads and show their tails. They are careful not to reveal any movement, otherwise they will face an overwhelming and terrifying tide of corpses. Nowadays, the law enforcement team is so violent and forcibly carving a path among the corpses everywhere, which really makes these awakened people unexpected. Dear me, is this law enforcement team so powerful? The fat man held the steering wheel and looked at the transparent mountain of corpses and blood in front of him with a surprised look on his face. Wei Ling, however, looked as if she had expected it. This is Ji Yufeng's consistent style, whether dealing with zombies or humans. Her brother Wei Ying and Ji Yufeng were colleagues, so Wei Ling naturally learned a lot about Ji Yufeng from Wei Ying. Wei Ling rarely became serious and said calmly, "It is said that when the law enforcement team was first established, there were proposals for a combat team, a corpse-killing team, a rescue team, etc., but in the end Ji Yufeng overcame all the opinions and named it the law enforcement team." Ji Yufeng's law enforcement team not only enforces the order of Yuhai, but also the laws of the entire world. Listening to Wei Ling's words, Mu Chu didn't expect that the name of this law enforcement team had such origin. "Do you follow the laws of the world?" Mu Chu suddenly chuckled and said, "I have to say that Ji Yufeng is really brave this time. Yes, without such courage, how can one be worthy of the title of White Death? The war ahead is still raging. Under the ruthless collision of the steel chariots, the zombie tide has been opened, but there are still countless zombies behind them, rushing forward one after another without fear of death. To be precise, they are dead a long time ago, so they are not afraid of death." The roof of the military vehicle in the front row was opened, and the soldiers of the law enforcement team simply took out their machine guns to cover the area with fire. The flames from the muzzle sprayed wildly, and countless bullets hit the tide of corpses like the Milky Way pouring down. A large number of zombies' heads were hit by swift bullets, and their heads exploded like watermelons. Blood splashed in the air, and blood rain soaked the ground. The dense tide of corpses all over the street was instantly opened up, and in the middle of the corpse group were dozens of vehicles carrying living people. In the middle of a dozen Humvee military vehicles rushing at the front, Ji Yufeng, wearing a white suit, was sitting in the vehicle presiding over the overall situation. A voice came from the transmitter in the car, "Captain, we have opened a gap in the zombie tide. If this continues, it won't be long before we reach our destination." Hearing this, Ji Yufeng, who was sitting in the passenger seat, did not look happy at all. His slightly pale lips slowly spoke out cold words, "Something's wrong." An adjutant beside him said doubtfully, "Captain, we got rid of the corpse tide so easily. This should be a good thing." Ji Yufeng did not speak, but ordered the team to move on. The entire law enforcement team's process of cleaning up the zombies was extremely smooth, without even losing a single manpower. This made the search team that followed the law enforcement team very excited and gained confidence in the next plan to wipe out the heretic religion. Only a few people are not optimistic about this seemingly good situation. Mu Chu looked through the window at the terrifying tide of corpses crushed by the powerful methods of the law enforcement team, with an intriguing smile on her lips. When he was the Fire Demon Lord, one of the few memory fragments happened to include the scene of the zombies confronting the human army. The scene at that time was far from as one-sided as it is now. There are tens of thousands of zombie groups, powerful, strange and terrifying heretics, and a zombie king who will definitely appear in the zombie group. The presence of any one of these factors is enough to cause these well-equipped search teams to suffer a lot and suffer heavy losses. But here, none of them exist. Mewtwo had a vague feeling that there was a greater danger ahead, waiting for these human groups filled with the joy of victory. But of course Mewtwo didn't care about this kind of problem. On the contrary, he still had a special expectation in his heart. After all, the unknown is the most interesting adventure. Next to her, Chi-Chi stared curiously at the scene outside the car. This was the first time she had seen such a large-scale zombie invasion. Mewtwo rubbed the girl's head and chuckled. So, the situation here is much scarier than your place, right? The over there that Mewtwo was referring to was naturally the world that Chi-Chi originally lived in. It was also invaded by some kind of apocalypse virus, but the extent was far less terrifying than the zombie virus in this world. The girl leaned against Mewtwo's side, not even feeling the slightest fear when facing the terrifying zombies outside. Chi-Chi nodded cutely. They have lost their original consciousness, just like a puppet without a body. The convoy rushed through the violent corpse tide like a storm, and soon left the center of the most prosperous street in Lenogne City with a group of search teams behind it. But they didn't notice that in the shadow of the alley next to this street, a disc-shaped flying device was flashing red dots on the screen, quietly monitoring every move of the convoy. The sun was scorching in the sky, and the sunlight was shining so hard that the earth was dry and cracked. The old urban area has become dilapidated because it has been lifeless for too long, and the high-rise buildings that once stood are now gathering dust. The trees and weeds growing wildly along the street, some green plants have spread to the road, and thick vine roots are embedded in old buildings. Dozens of vehicles of various shapes were parked in the middle of the road, and directly in front of them was the target of this encirclement and suppression mission, the D&D Entertainment Club. Many law enforcement team soldiers and awakened people from the search team stepped out of the car at this moment. At first glance, there were hundreds of them. Since the outbreak of the apocalypse, such a large number of humans have rarely appeared openly in the ruins of such cities. Mewtwo looked up at the giant building with a height of more than 10 floors in front of her. It was hard to imagine that this was just a high-end club. The fat man was amazed at the sight. These rich people are so good, the entertainment venues are so high-end, but I have never seen them before. It's like a little palace. Not far away, Chunan, who was dressed like an idiot, bit a rose in his mouth and said with disdain, "Look at you, you look like you have never seen the world, you bumpkin." When the fat man heard this, he smiled cheekily and said, "Yeah, I'm not like some rich second-generation losers who rely on their father. They are nothing after leaving their father, and they still don't forget to dress up in the apocalypse." Quote, Chunan was instantly angry, but it was difficult to get angry in the presence of Ji Yufeng. "Captain, all members of the law enforcement team and search team have arrived." At the front of the team, a young man wearing a military cap walked up to Ji Yufeng and reported. Ji Yufeng nodded, but looked towards the entrance directly in front. There should have been a row of revolving glass doors, but at some point they were converted into thick iron doors. I don't know what kind of material the iron gate is made of. Even if the soldiers from the law enforcement team fired machine guns, they could only leave light scratches. "Captain, why don't we use explosive devices?" a member of the law enforcement team suggested beside him. "No, there are still many living survivors inside." Upon hearing that the entire building was about to be blown up, Lu Qingfei immediately stepped forward to stop it. Her fiancé was probably trapped in the building. At this time, the middle-aged man who released the purple light curtain last night said, "The D&D Entertainment Club is the largest entertainment center in Lenogne City. Celebrities from all walks of life often gather here. I am afraid that the survivors inside have been taken hostage by the heterogeneous religion." The middle-aged man hesitated for a moment, then reminded him, "Boss Zhang's nephew seems to have disappeared here. Before leaving, Boss Zhang told us to try our best to save his nephew." The Boss Zhang in the man's mouth is naturally one of the 3 leaders of Yuhai Base, Zhang Qingwei, who was a wealthy Shangjia man in the last days. Just when the team members were having different opinions and hesitating, Ji Yufeng suddenly raised his hand. Everyone calmed down immediately, but heard Ji Yufeng say, "No, it's already opened." As soon as he finished speaking, there was a sudden click sound from the iron door not far away. Everyone was shocked when they heard that the thick iron door had quietly opened at some point. Behind the door was the ultimate goal of their trip, the Church of the Alien Origin. Many members, whether they were the law enforcement team or the search team summoned temporarily, looked at the dark door and looked at each other. Isn't this an empty city strategy? The fat man swallowed, feeling uneasy. It's just that no one responded to him this time, because everyone else was also extremely dumb. Anyone with a discerning eye can see that there must be a trap inside, but now they have lost their mind when it comes to the mission. Ji Yufeng's face was still indifferent and he ordered, "Follow me in." After saying that, a person actually walked towards the building. Now that the matter has come to this, everyone can only obey the order. Moreover, with the white god of death in front of them, everyone is somewhat comforted. It's just that the members of the law enforcement team at the rear are all hardworking, armed with guns and artillery, and will be ready to attack at the slightest crisis. The awakened members of the search team also observed their surroundings with vigilance. After walking on the tightrope for a long time, they have developed a natural intuition for danger. Mu Chu and others followed the law enforcement team. Mu Chu looked up at the huge building towering into the clouds. There was already some expectation in his heart. New power. Facing the unknown danger ahead, Ji Yufeng had already made arrangements for the entire team last night. Walking in the front row were the law enforcement members with guns and live ammunition, and around them were the awakened ones from the search team who were hunting behind them. If there is even the slightest movement nearby, these experienced awakened ones will wait for an opportunity like jungle beasts. At the core of the team are the awakened ones like Lu Qingfei and Xu Wen, who have auxiliary abilities or whose own strength is not outstanding. A team of hundreds of people was ready to go. Led by a white-haired man in a suit, they slowly entered the high-rise building called Daishindi Entertainment Club. After passing through the heavy iron gate, once you enter, you will see an extremely empty hall. Even if hundreds of people rush in, it is still spacious. The counters, tables and chairs in the hall had been cleared away at some point. From a distance, the red carpet on the ground seemed to be soaked in blood. The silent hall became even more profound under the haze in everyone's hearts. What's strange is that the entire building has a hollow design. In the middle of the hall stands a thick column with several people hugging each other. It is carved with dragons and phoenixes, and is meticulously crafted with exquisite craftsmanship. When I looked up, I saw that the central part of the hall was covered with dozens of wide steps covered with red carpet. The hall is surrounded by numbered boxes, but the doors of these boxes are also made of fine iron and locked. The whole building has been artificially modified. Chen Weo used to be a decoration worker, and he immediately saw the clues after glancing around. There was no entertainment atmosphere in the entire building, but instead there was an extremely solid silence in the air, and an unpredictable and weird atmosphere. Everyone be on alert. The man in the military hat next to Ji Yufeng waved, signaling the team to move forward. Mu Chu was walking at the front of the team, looking at the interior of the building that had been transformed beyond recognition, feeling an inexplicable feeling in her heart. Just speaking of this empty and deep hall, the walls are curved and surrounded by a huge column in the middle. It felt to Mu Chu less like a reception club and more like a gladiatorial arena. Ba bang bang. Just as a team of several hundred people were waiting in formation and were about to go upstairs, a burst of clapping suddenly came from all directions in the hall. Welcome everyone from Yuhai to visit the Dadiandi Entertainment Club. The sudden sound accurately entered the minds of everyone present. Spiritual transmission. Being able to transmit words into the minds of hundreds of people present at the same time, it is obvious that this person's supernatural power has great attainments in the soul. They are from the heterogeneous church. With the enemy in front of him, everyone's eyes instantly became wary. But I heard this ethereal but hoarse voice say, everyone in the world is ignorant. They regard the gift given to mankind by the Creator as a sin. It is simply pitiful and pitiful. As the slightly older voice echoed in everyone's minds, a figure in purple robes seemed to appear in front of everyone's eyes. The figure was stooped and wearing a hood, making it difficult to see the face. Mu Chu looked at the purple-robed figure that appeared out of thin air, her eyes burning brightly. He had seen similar clothing in Yuhai base. That was the power of the 12 talismans he obtained after signing in. After using the sheep talisman for the first time to leave his body, he saw a similar figure in a tower in Yuhai. It seems that the heterogeneous religion has invaded the interior of Jade Sea. Mu Chu thought to herself. The Creator pities life, gives alien species, and baptizes all living beings with alien species. This is the change of times and the sublimation of species. Come, accept us, accommodate us, join us. As the hoarse voice continued to reach the ears, a feeling of love came to their hearts, and the awakened people present seemed to have found a home in their hearts. They couldn't help but stretch out their arms, wanting to hold the warmth in front of them. Kill. Suddenly, a loud shout came directly into everyone's minds like a bolt from the blue, directly shaking many team members who had fallen into some kind of slumber to wake up. Only then did everyone realize that they had just fallen into some kind of mental control and almost fell into the trap of a cult. Looking up again, at some point, a purple-robed figure was floating above the hall. Someone in the law enforcement team reacted, immediately pointed their gun at the figure in the air, and pulled the trigger. The bullet shot out with a bang, and hit the purple-robed man in the air, passing through the air and into the wall. It's an illusion. Some awakened people saw that the method used by the purple-robed man was nothing more than a spiritual illusion. Ignorant fool. The purple-robed man sighed softly. God's subordinates will give you salvation. As the purple-robed man's words became farther and farther away, his figure suspended in the air gradually dimmed, and finally dissipated in the air. TCH, pretending to be a ghost. The fat man mocked disdainfully. In his opinion, this was just the fact that the Church of Alien was on the verge of death and was still being stubborn. Ji Yufeng in front said to the middle-aged man beside him, "Did you sense it?" The middle-aged man opened his eyes and nodded. The mental fluctuations come from the top floor, which should be the headquarters of the heterogeneous religion. Suddenly, Xu Wen, who was in the center of the team, twitched her ears as if she heard something strange, so many scary sounds. What? The awakened people around them didn't understand. But Xu Wen raised her little hand tremblingly, pointing to a wall of the box, and her voice trembled as she spoke. They are right here. At this moment, there was a sudden sound of a mechanism operating in the box around the wall of the hall. There was a loud bang, and everyone turned around suddenly, only to find that the door they entered was already closed. As the doors of the box opened automatically, the existence inside was revealed to everyone. Roar, hiss. A series of dull and hoarse groans came from the depths of the box, and then a pair of red and bloodthirsty eyes suddenly opened. This is. Everyone's eyes were full of surprise. What was being imprisoned in these closed box doors turned out to be a group of bloodthirsty and terrifying zombie heretics. A pair of bloodshot scarlet eyes walked out of the box, exuding a strong smell of blood. The boxes around the hall were opened one after another, and those who walked out were all terrifying heretics with ferocious faces. They surrounded everyone, and the number of them turned out to be hundreds. Oh no, why do I think I've seen this scene before? The fat man looked at the many monsters that appeared from the box with a stunned look on his face, and the corners of his mouth twitched. They had also experienced the scene of being surrounded by zombie monsters not long ago, when they were framed by Ma Kun and his group. It's just that the number of heretics this time is far more terrifying than last time. The number of hundreds of terrifying zombie monsters is outrageous, and all of them are at least sea level or above. I finally understand why there are so few zombies in the city. These zombie monsters are actually kept in the building by the alien church. Just when everyone was surprised, the zombie heretics seemed to have seen some delicious food, rushing toward everyone like a tide. The members of the law enforcement team reacted, pulled the trigger of the thermal weapon in their hands, spit out tongues of fire, and fired wildly at the zombies rushing around. But these zombies are much harder to deal with than ordinary zombies in urban areas. Some of the zombies were so huge that their whole bodies were covered with thick fat. Bullets hitting their bodies had no effect and were ejected instantly. Some zombies are extremely fast and have a keen sense of danger. They can easily dodge the overwhelming bullets as their figures sway, leap into the air and bite the crowd. What's more, the terrifying alien spits dark green mucus from its mouth, and the parts of the team members that hit it are instantly corroded and their flesh and blood are blurred. But the combat power on the human side is equally impressive. The fat man was holding a machete. After images of his fat figure appeared while moving at high speed. When he appeared again, he was in front of a zombie and slashed hard at the back of the head and neck. Although Chen Weiguo's ability as a defensive barrier, the range it can extend is also quite limited. He simply set up a wide barrier around the law enforcement team's soldiers beside him, and resisted by firing machine guns together with the soldiers. Playboy Chu Nan has a unique ability. He took a rose from his mouth, broke off a petal and threw it into the air. The petal cut off a zombie's neck like a sharp blade. Mu Chu, protect Sister Qingfei and the others. A cooing sound sounded from behind Mu Chu, and Wei Linger had transformed into a cat lady at some point. She jumped up and rushed toward the corpses in front of her with her sharp claws. The Catwoman transformed by Wei Linger is extremely flexible and agile, and with her petite stature, it is difficult for some slow-moving zombies to touch the corners of her clothes. She enters and exits the tide of corpses with heroic posture. How can you let Sister Linger stand out alone at this time? A seductive voice reached Mu Chu's ears. Mu Chu turned her head and saw Lu Qianchen, who was wearing a red cheongsam and had a slim figure, walking forward on cat steps. As Lu Qianchen moved, a strange energy surged from her body, and soon 3 fiery red fox tails appeared behind her. And a pair of fox-like ears appeared on the top of Lu Qianchen's head. Lu Qianchen's superpower is actually related to foxes. A Catwoman and a vixen, no wonder they don't like each other. Mu Chu can probably understand the reason why Wei Linger and Lu Qianchen are in tit for tat. Many of the awakened people in the search teams around him also released their own powers and showed off their magical powers. The bodies of some awakened people suddenly swelled, their clothes were torn, their golden hair stood up due to invisible explosive energy, and their palms could also shoot blue qigong. Some bodies assimilated with the rocks, and their skin became dark, turning into a huge stone man, and bravely crashed into the group of corpses. Next, a birdman with wings, an awakened person whose body can be split into pieces, an awakened person whose body can stretch like a spring, all kinds of weird abilities appeared in front of Mu Chu. Mu Chu stood there, watching everyone's wonderful performances, as if appreciating a show, nodding her head from time to time. At this time, a ferocious giant dog opened its mouth and bit into Mu Chu's position. Mu Chu stood sluggishly, but the moment the giant dog was about to jump off, a long and narrow ice pick pierced the giant dog's forehead. The giant dog's bloodthirsty eyes widened, a wisp of blood spattered from the back of its head, and its huge body fell down in an instant. Mu Chu saw it interestingly, and suddenly wanted to loosen up her muscles and bones. The black windbreaker stood up without any wind, and Mu Chu slowly walked forward. As he moved, Mu Chu's palms closed together, and crystal blue ice mist came out in an instant, gradually gathering into a long knife. Mu Chu's pace immediately quickened, ice crystals condensed under her feet, and Mu Chu actually stepped on the ice crystals and rose into the air. A zombie with twisted limbs but flexible body and red skin bounced up from the ground, and attacked Mu Chu with a pair of extremely sharp claws. Mu Chu jumped straight into the air, and the sharp knife and claws collided with each other, causing the color of gold and iron to clash, and sparks flying everywhere. The next second, the long knife cut off the zombie's claws with a click, and the flexible zombie's body was also dismembered by Mu Chu's knife. On the other side, several zombies attacked Lu Qianchen, who was wearing a cheongsam. Lu Qianchen had a charming smile on her lips, and several red tails composed of supernatural energy behind her were commanded by her like arms. Like the tentacles of an octopus, several zombies were instantly whipped out by Lu Qianchen's fox-like tail, and a sly smile flashed across Lu Qianchen's eyes. At this moment, a short figure flashed behind him, spraying out a stream of dark green liquid. Lu Qianchen turned around in fear and tried to escape, but it was obviously too late. She closed her eyes subconsciously. At this moment, a black figure flashed past, followed by a magnificent blue sword light. Lu Qianchen opened her eyes and found that she was being held in Mu Chu's arms. In front of Mu Chu, there stood a blue ice wall, with traces of corrosion from mucus still remaining on it. And the zombie was frozen in an instant. Lu Qianchen realized that it was Mu Chu who saved her, and said with a charming smile, "Brother Mu Chu, thank you for saving my sister." Just as Lu Qianchen was about to say something else, Mu Chu gently put it down and rushed towards the corpses on the side in a flash. Lu Qianchen chopped off her feet severely and vented her anger on the surrounding zombies. In the fierce battle between hundreds of human awakeners and zombie heretics, a black figure holding an ice-blue sword flashed on the battlefield like a walking god of death. Among the swords, there were several zombie heads. Fall. Ji Yufeng, who had been motionless, looked at the black-robed figure who was navigating among the corpses with ease. There was no expression on his still indifferent face, but a curtain of light flashed across his black-rimmed glasses. The middle-aged man next to him exclaimed, "He is indeed the awakened person of the element system. His strength is really so strong. I will probably become Wang Dapeng again in a few years." Ji Yufeng's eyes narrowed slightly under his glasses, and no one knew what he was thinking. Although the zombies that suddenly rushed into the hall from the box were numerous in number and were generally B-level and C-level, the humans in Yuhai were not vegetarians after all. Not to mention the numerous firearms and powerful awakened beings of the law enforcement team, the search team that was summoned temporarily are also experienced veterans, and the average level is around B-level. Therefore, although the whole battle was not smooth, it was much easier than imagined. Even Ji Yufeng, who has the highest combat power in the S-class, did not take any action during the whole process and just stood aside and watched coldly. The battle is gradually coming to an end. The originally empty and dark hall is now covered in blood. The high-grade blankets spread everywhere are even darker red. The floor is full of zombies and broken human limbs. The survivors and law enforcement team soldiers who had finished the battle panted and looked at the corpses on the ground. For a moment, they couldn't help but feel grateful that just being alive was the greatest luxury. Soon, under the gaze of everyone, Ji Yufeng walked to the stairs, looked at the deep and wide steps, and said slowly, "Anyone who is alive, follow me up." The white suit was spotless, and the indifferent expression on his face seemed to have nothing to do with the brutal hellish battle just now. At this time, even if there were casualties, everyone naturally did not dare to be afraid. Instead, they were inspired by the battle just now and rushed up the stairs following Ji Yufeng. As soon as they went upstairs, everyone clearly realized that the atmosphere here was more gloomy than that on the first floor. It's obviously a sunny day outside, but the entire second floor is light tight. The dim corridor looked so dark and quiet, like the lingering haze suppressing everyone's hearts. "My dear, this floor is really big. It's 2 or 3 times the size of a normal floor." The fat man couldn't help exclaiming as he walked in the team. There was a bandage wrapped around his shoulder. It was scratched by a zombie during the battle. Now it is getting better under Lu Qingfei's treatment. Mu Chu looked up at the layout of the second floor. One floor alone was as tall as several adults, which was beyond the reach of ordinary people. "It's a good place for killing." Mu Chu keenly sensed an unusual smell in the air. "Watch out for human survivors," said an officer from the law enforcement team. But at this moment, waves of low roars suddenly came from a distance. From the dozens of private rooms on the second floor, dark figures mixed with the smell of blood also sprang out. Everyone instantly became alert. Only a few dozen figures appeared this time, but the rest of the team were alert. Because without exception, these dozens of zombie monsters have all reached the B-level level. The bodies of these zombies have undergone some degree of alienation. It cannot be said how powerful heretics they have become, but their temperaments will only become more cruel. Zombies are not afraid of death, and they have no sense of pain. It is even more difficult to deal with them at the B level, let alone dozens of mutated zombies that they have to deal with this time. Dozens of mutated zombies rushed into the group of law enforcement team members at the front at extremely fast speeds. Most of the members of these law enforcement teams were ordinary people who had not yet awakened. They had no chance to react when attacked by these extremely fast and terrifying zombies. Some of them were torn apart and bitten by the terrifying zombies in an instant, with blood splattering on them. Almost all the awakened people around them reacted in the next moment and launched their abilities to attack the violent mutant zombies. Mu Chu did not take action again this time, but just stood aside quietly and admired the wonderful battle next to him. Although these mutated zombies with deformed bodies are extremely fast, they are all terrifying existences that have reached B level. If they were placed in the ruins outside, any team of searchers would be completely wiped out if they encountered them. But there are a lot of powerful awakened people here who can't stand it, and there are even many A-level masters who are far from showing their true strength. Sure enough, not long after, dozens of mutated zombies also fell at the feet of many awakened ones. It's just that this time there were obviously a lot more casualties, but they were all ordinary humans in the law enforcement team, and the awakened ones were more injured. Fortunately, there were also many people with healing abilities in the team, and within a short time, all the wounded were healed. Dear me, there aren't a bunch of monsters like this on every floor, are there? The fat man looked at the stairs ahead with fear and murmured. This is also the thought of many humans in the team. Anyone with a discerning eye can see that this is a trap set by the alien cult in order to consume their strength layer by layer. If this continues, I am afraid that by the time they reach the top floor, there will be only 1 out of 10 people in their team. I can understand why there are so few high-level zombies in the city, although I don't know what methods they use to control these monsters. But at this moment, these terrifying and powerful beings are probably gathered in this building. Chen Weo also lost his temper and expressed his inner thoughts with a wry smile. But now that the matter has come to this, there is obviously no way out. The middle-aged man next to Ji Yufeng whispered, "This operation is strictly confidential, but the heterogeneous religion has such a thorough arrangement. I'm afraid there is a traitor among us." Ji Yufeng pushed the frame of the mirror and didn't say anything, but just led the way to the steps. What happened next was exactly what everyone expected. There were a large number of zombie heretics lurking in each floor, and the strength of the monsters on each floor continued to increase. Most of the soldiers of the law enforcement team have been lost, and even the awakened members of the temporarily convened search team have suffered varying degrees of casualties. Even if there are healing awakeners in the team, they cannot treat this fatal injury in time. Going to the back, even the awakened members of the law enforcement team beside Ji Yufeng had to fight to save the casualties in the team. When they rushed to a certain floor, everyone's clothes were already dripping with blood. Their faces looked a little tired, and the weapons in their hands were also covered in blood. And somewhere on the top floor, dozens of figures in robes were watching the killing feast of humans and monsters downstairs through the monitor. The final scene is frozen in the scene of the team resuming treatment on a certain floor. Jehieji, a man in red robes, had a pale smile on his face, with 2 sharp teeth sticking out from the corners of his mouth. Take a good rest, after all, the fun is still to come. The following is the precious gift I left for you. After several fierce battles, everyone in the team had tired looks on their faces. Continuous killings gradually made these time-tested awakened ones numb. Gradually, they only knew how to wave the weapons in their hands towards the zombies attacking them, and densely packed terrifying monsters followed behind them. Only the captain of the law enforcement team, Ji Yufeng, who was always at the front of the team, never took action. He even watched the awakened people around him die in front of him several times, but he didn't care. This made the awakened people in the search team angry but helpless at the same time. After all, the title of White Death was enough to scare them into silence. Everyone stepped onto a certain floor of the building with wary eyes on their faces. There was a nameplate on the top that read, 13th floor. The entire club building is only 14 stories high. During this period, they have never discovered a human survivor. But what puzzles Chu is that until now, the system in his mind has not responded at all. Is it possible that I have to reach the top floor by myself to meet the sign-in requirements? So far, there are only dozens of people left in the team that originally numbered hundreds. And most of these people are people with awakened abilities whose strength has reached level B or above. The rest of the human race died tragically at the hands of mutated zombie monsters. According to previous experience, the monsters in this floor must be extremely powerful. After all, the terrifying existence of A-level zombies has appeared in the previous floors. Everyone was ready to fight to the death with the monsters on this floor, but when they stepped into the floor, they found that the entire floor seemed extremely quiet. After a while, no ferocious monster roared out of the door. Everything seemed to be back to how it was when everyone first entered the club. The oppressive atmosphere instantly surrounded everyone's hearts, and the previous scenes full of killing still lingered in everyone's hearts, and it was difficult to dissipate. As time went by, finally some awakened people could no longer bear the heavy psychological pressure, howling and rushing towards a room with the machete in their hands. No one present, including Ji Yufeng, tried to stop him. After a while, the awakened person who rushed into the room suddenly ran back, shouting, "There are people! There are survivors! As soon as they heard the news that there were survivors, everyone immediately showed joy, and dozens of figures filed into the room. As soon as they entered the room, a huge bathing pool of more than 100 square meters came into view. It seems that this room is actually a man-made hot spring bath. However, only a few rays of light from the window came through the bath at this moment, and the original water source in the pool had long since dried up. Several human beings in tattered clothes, with yellow faces and skinny muscles, tied with a few hemp ropes, were huddled in the corner and shivering. Ji Yufeng led the team towards the survivors in the corner, and the middle-aged man among them asked, "We are from the Yuhai safety zone and came to rescue you. What happened here?" Several people seemed to have been abused for a long time, and their quarrels were a bit awkward. Only one young man said in a hoarse voice, "Yes, they are people from the heathen religion. They caught us here and want to keep us as livestock. Monster food." As soon as this statement came out, everyone immediately frowned. Taking living people as food for zombies, this heterogeneous religion has indeed become crazy and insane. But I heard the young man say again, "There are survivors captured by them in other rooms on this floor. Some have already." Having said this, the young man began to cough violently, and it was obvious that he was struggling to speak at this moment. "Those lunatics. When I catch them, I will cut them into pieces," the fat man said angrily. Bah! In his opinion, these survivors were all placed on this floor. Presumably the people from the heterogeneous religion didn't have any other abilities. Ji Yufeng's eyes flashed, as if he wanted to see something in the young man's eyes. Who would have thought that this scrawny young man was so frightened that he fainted when he was stared at by Ji Yufeng's piercing eyes? Everyone understood that even they, the awakened ones, did not dare to look at the white god of death, let alone such ordinary people. First find all the survivors in this building to find out the information about the heterogeneous religion. Ji Yufeng turned to look at everyone and said slowly, "We still can't take it lightly now. Search the entire floor with the search team as a unit. One team of law enforcement team will stay here, and the other team will search with me." Everyone readily agreed. After all, it would be extremely unwise to fight against the heterogeneous cult on the top floor without fully understanding the situation. Who knows what other tricks these lunatics have? It would be safer to start checking out some information from the survivors here. The entire floor is vast, and even if several search teams are sent out to conduct the investigation, it will be quite slow. Under Ji Yufeng's division of labor arrangements, everyone began to take action, while several members of the law enforcement team stayed in the hot spring bath to take care of these miserable survivors. A member of the law enforcement team saw that these survivors were emaciated and looked like they had not eaten enough for a long time. Feeling compassion, he took out a pack of compressed biscuits from his waist pocket and gave them to several survivors to share. "Oh, brother, I have wronged you. Life will be much easier when we get to Yuhai," a member of the law enforcement team said with emotion. "It's all because of this stupid heterogeneous religion. Many of my brothers died in this operation. The alien cultists are also a bunch of brainless people." When the members of the law enforcement team saw that the operation was about to succeed, they began to vent their anger and cursed the heterogeneous church like crazy. The young man next to him who had just provided information to everyone picked up a biscuit and stuffed it into his mouth. The violent, clicking, sound of the teeth reached the ears of the members of the law enforcement team, and the law enforcement team members seemed to have forgotten themselves. The meaning of their words was that they wanted to tear the heterogeneous religion into pieces, crushing the bones and scattering ashes to relieve their hatred. After a while, seeing that none of the young people around him showed any sign of agreement, they thought it was because the young people had not eaten such satiating food for too long. The members of the law enforcement team turned around and said with a smile, "Don't worry, brother, wait until you get to Yuhai. There will be more and more of these foods from now on." "Yeah," the young man replied calmly, but the intensity of chewing at the corners of his mouth was gradually getting smaller. "Haha, little brother, have you never been to the Yuhai base? This kind of compressed biscuits can only be regarded as ordinary food in the Yuhai. As long as you have a skill, even if you can't become an awakener." The member of the law enforcement team was about to say something else, but was interrupted by the hoarse voice of the young man. "It's just weird, why are these foods? It's not as delicious as human flesh." As he spoke, the young man with a sallow face and skinny muscles showed his white teeth, but there were still traces of blood stains on them. What? The member of the law enforcement team who stayed behind was stunned for a moment, with a frozen expression on his face. The next moment, he felt a chill on his neck. Then, a headless corpse appeared in his sight, and this corpse was all too familiar to him. Because this is exactly what his body is. The heads of the members of the law enforcement team rolled to the ground like a gourd, with an incredible look in their eyes. The young man in ragged clothes licked the remaining blood on the dagger with a sinister smile on his face. He turned to look at his companions. I saw several survivors who were sallow and thin just now, and seemed to be weak, now stood up, with the same sarcastic smile on their faces. Beside them, the bodies of the remaining members of the law enforcement team lay. The young man stood up with a ferocious smile and said mockingly, "The people in Yuhai are really kind-hearted. What a bunch of docile lambs." Next, it depends on other people. The interior of the entire club building is extremely spacious. One private room alone has an area of several hundred square meters. Each room has a different style and function, not to mention the luxurious hall and loft outside. This is also the reason why Ji Yufeng ordered the teams to separate. If they searched every house, the people from the heterogeneous religion above would have run away long ago. Mu Chu and the others pushed open a gilded door and walked in. What they saw was a TV screen as wide as a wall, with a row of leather booths on both sides. This is a luxurious karaoke private room. Chen Weo erected a light blue barrier shield and stood in front of everyone. The fat man covered with scars also held the meteor hammer with a wary look on his face. Only Lu Qingfei, who was surrounded by several people, had anxiety and expectation in her eyes. According to the words of previous survivors, her husband is likely to be in these rooms. As several people stepped deeper, a violent, whimpering sound suddenly came from the rightmost booth near the big screen. Mu Chu and others rushed over after hearing the sound, only to see several survivors in tattered clothes tied up in the corner. It's just that the faces of these survivors are younger, and even though the clothes on their bodies are shabby, it can be vaguely seen from the fabrics and the logos of the famous brands on them that these clothes are valuable. The eyes of several awakened people were darkened, as if they had not had enough sleep for a long time. The fat man stepped forward and tore off the tape on the mouths of several survivors. The condition of these survivors was much better than the previous ones. At first, a bloated man had a rope tied to his body. As soon as he saw the clothes of several people, he knew that his rescuer was coming. As soon as the seal on his mouth was torn off, the bloated man scolded impatiently, "Why did you come now?" Fatty and others were stunned by these reproachful words filled with resentment. When they rescued people in the past, on which occasion did the survivors burst into tears of gratitude to them, so grateful that they even knelt down in front of them. This was the first time they had seen such a domineering survivor. Weilinger said angrily, "Who are you? We are here to save you out of kindness, what is your attitude?" The bloated man patted the dust on his sleeves disdainfully. Even though it was dirty, he still said calmly, "My father is the commander of the Linan military region. You must be sent by him to rescue me. Stop talking nonsense and take us out quickly. I don't want to stay in this place for a moment." The man seemed to have been trapped in this building for a long time, and even his tone of voice was full of resentment. Everyone was shocked by this man's strange mind. The fat man became even more angry and cursed angrily, "Can't you understand the situation? What's the use of moving you out? What age is this? The entire city of Linan has fallen into a sea of blood and corpses. How can he be so proud of his pre-apocalyptic background?" Only Mu Chu noticed that this man's eyes were red, as if he was attracted by some invisible fluctuation, and his mental state was a bit strange. However, he saw this man standing up without thinking about himself, but his eyes suddenly looked at Ji Qi, who was beside Mu Chu. "The little girl looks really good, come on, let me see." As he said this, the bloated man who had just been saved actually reached out his hand to the girl's beautiful face. Suddenly, an icy blue beam of light penetrated directly between the bloated man's eyebrows. From the moment the man was shot to death, to when his bloated body fell to the ground, the whole process took no more than a split second. But at the moment when the man fell to the ground, several survivors behind the man also moved in response, with red eyes and rushed towards them like crazy demons. None of the team members reacted to the apparent attack. Only Mu Chu, who was walking at the back, seemed to have expected it. His body swayed, and a dagger appeared in his hand. The necks of several violent survivors were torn apart as bloodlines flew. What is going on? Wei Ling'er looked at the corpses lying on the ground and couldn't calm down for a long time. She didn't understand why the humans who had been talking to them fluently just now suddenly attacked them like zombies. Others were also puzzled, so they all looked in Mu Chu's direction. Mu Chu, how did you find out there was something wrong with them? The sharp dagger made of ice in his hand turned into ice and dissipated. Mu Chu smiled at everyone and said, their mental state is much better than that of the group we met before, but this is also the most bizarre thing. The reason was of course made up by Mu Chu. What really made him notice the abnormality was his keen mental ability. Mu Chu glanced at the corpses of survivors on the ground. I saw an indescribable excitement in the eyes of these people, but it was definitely not the joy after being rescued, it was more like excitement. Excited. Everyone was confused. It's like taking drugs. These people seem to be still living in their own spiritual world. Mu Chu said, looking up in a certain direction in the sky. I think you can explain to us the reason for all this, right? Everyone looked around suddenly, only to find that there was a sudden wave of water ripples in the air, and immediately a rickety figure wearing a purple robe appeared in front of everyone's eyes. Is it him? Everyone in the team was shocked. This purple-robed man was the pagan cultist they met when they first entered the building. Jihyeji. As soon as the man in purple robe appeared, he let out a low and sinister laugh. I originally wanted to have fun with you, but I didn't expect to be found out so quickly. Chapter 71. As soon as the purple-robed man appeared in the hall, he used his ability to bewitch hundreds of humans, including many awakened ones. His powerful strength left a deep impression on several people. They even thought that this purple-robed man was the final boss of this alien church stronghold. No one expected that they would encounter this awakened person with powerful spiritual powers in this room. You control these survivors and let them live in their own spiritual world. That's why they look so excited, but in fact they haven't come out of their fantasy world at all. Mu Chu told the truth with a calm face. The purple-robed man was not angry at Mu Chu's words. Instead, he looked at Mu Chu with an appreciative tone. If I hadn't seen your ability, I would have thought you were an awakened person with extraordinary spiritual talents. Boy, do you want to join? The purple-robed man was halfway through his words when he paused again. Hey, let's forget it. I prefer to strangle a genius like you in the cradle. Tisk, 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 tisk. Listening to the purple-robed man talking to himself like a madman, everyone couldn't laugh at all, and they were already on guard in their hearts. After all, this is a powerful existence that can easily confuse hundreds of humans. The ice-making boy's powers look familiar. If my guess is correct, it was you who destroyed Experiment 007, right? Everyone looked at each other in shock, and then realized that the experimental product in the purple robe's mouth should be the big-headed monster baby that the team met in the hospital before. Now is the perfect time to settle the accounts from last time together. As the purple-robed man spoke, an invisible spiritual wave that only Mu Chu could feel spread through the room. Next, let me see the fear deep in your hearts, Jia Jia. Although he was right in front of them, the purple-robed man's words became softer and softer, until finally, they were as faint as mosquitoes in everyone's ears. The strange thing is that the surrounding scene gradually changes in front of everyone's eyes. Qing Fei. A familiar voice echoed in my ears. Concubine Lu Qing turned her head in a daze, only to find that she was in a ruins. Before she could figure out what was going on, the scene in front of her completely disrupted her thoughts. In front of her, a man in a suit was lying on the ground in a bloody state. Surrounded by a dozen zombies with ferocious faces and white pupils were eating the man's flesh and blood. In the distance, zombies kept rushing forward, biting and fighting for the man's body. This man covered in blood is his fiancée who has been missing for 2 years. Xu Feng. Lu Qingfei covered her mouth in disbelief and cried. She rushed forward to save the man, but found that her body was stuck in a mud wall and she couldn't move at all. She could only watch helplessly as the living limbs of her longing for husband were removed by zombies one after another, gnawing at the flesh crazily like a hungry beast. What's even more frightening is that her husband's head is facing her the whole time, His eyes are wide open, and his mouth is constantly wailing, save me, concubine Ching. We agreed to get married. I am your husband, concubine Ching. Why don't you come to save me? Why? The man's speech became faster and faster, and the questions from his mouth became more and more sharp, but the only thing that remained unchanged was his body that was eaten to a bloody pulp. Hearing her husband's questioning, Lu Qingfei couldn't help but shake her head, with tears on her face. No, I have been looking for you for the past 2 years, You lied. The man scolded. Did you fall in love with another man? You broke the agreement between us. I didn't. Lu Qingfei looked directly at the man and shouted. The two looked at each other, and time seemed to freeze at this moment. You don't love me anymore, right? Suddenly, the man calmed down, and the only remaining head looked at concubine Lu Qing. A line of bloody tears flowed from the man's eyes. At this moment, concubine Lu Qing finally couldn't hold back anymore and squatted on the ground, covering her ears and crying loudly. Dad. The 5-year-old daughter beside him handed the peeled apple to Chen Huio. Chen Huio, who had just left the construction site, took the apple, rubbed his daughter's head, and smiled happily. The little girl seemed to have received some reward and jumped happily to the side. Chen Huio turned around and looked at his wife beside him. At this moment, the wife was carefully cutting another apple with a fruit knife and feeding it to her daughter's mouth, with a loving smile on her face. In this small rental house of less than 50 square meters, the most beautiful emotions in the world seemed to exist. Seeing this heartwarming scene, Chen Huio somehow felt a warm current surge in his heart, and the fatigue of the day after work was swept away at this moment. He stepped forward and hugged his wife and daughter, secretly vowing to protect them no matter what, so that his wife and daughter could live a good life. But at the next moment, the door was suddenly slammed open by a huge force. Zombies covered in blood rushed in from outside the house. Chen Huio was horrified. He was knocked down by several zombies in an instant. Severe pain came from his body, but he didn't care at all. In front of him were his wife and daughter, but at this time the 2 women he loved most were also knocked down and eaten by several zombies. No, seeing his wife and daughter being bitten into 2 fleshless skeletons in front of his eyes, Chen Huio was filled with misery and despair, and his big hands full of thick calluses scratched out bloody traces on the floor. At the same time, other members of the team were also experiencing their deepest fears. The man in purple robe peered into everyone's inner world, with a mocking smile on his face. His ability is a mental power called Heart Network. He can easily penetrate his mental power into other people's inner worlds and stimulate the most vulnerable parts of their minds, thereby subjecting them to hypnotic control or immersing them in his own world. What he likes to appreciate most is the secrets buried deep in other people's hearts, which can easily destroy the fear in a person's heart. Every time he saw the painful expressions on these people's faces, it would make his body tremble with excitement and his scalp numb. Suddenly, he discovered that the mental fluctuations of 2 people were extremely abnormal. Once his own spirit entered, there were signs of being backlashed. This can't help but make the purple-robed man feel a little surprised. He is a peak A-level mental superpower. It can be said that except for the powerful existences of S-level, none of these ordinary awakened people can escape his inner network. His ability has been tried and tested among these awakened ones, but now he encountered 2 troublesome existences at the same time. Thinking of this, the purple-robed man couldn't help but release part of his mental power, intending to personally enter the spiritual world of these 2 people to find out. This girl. The consciousness of the man in purple sank into the spiritual world of a girl wearing an orange goldfish suit below. Once the mental fluctuations he released previously entered the girl's spiritual world, they seemed to be sinking into the sea without any movement. This time, the spirit body composed of the purple-robed man's spiritual consciousness entered in person, only to find that he was in the ruins of a city that had long been dead. Different from the old cities in the real world, the buildings here were strangely destroyed and disintegrated by a kind of purple crystal. The seemingly magnificent purple crystal was deeply embedded in the ground of the high-rise buildings, and could not withstand the collapse and shattering in the next second. The whole world is extremely empty, as if it is on the verge of collapse at any time. In the distance, there was a blue beam of light that shot straight into the sky. The purple-robed man's spirit body floated in the air, only to see in front of him a towering tree made of purple crystals. On the trunk of the giant amethyst tree, there was a woman who looked similar to the pink-haired girl outside, her arms tied by an amethyst chain and hanging from it. The man in purple robe was looking at this incredible giant amethyst tree in surprise, but the girl who was tied up in the tree suddenly opened her eyes. 2 bunches of pink hair were tied to her cheeks, and with a faint smile in her purple pupils, she looked up at the purple-robed man floating in the air. Somehow, the man in purple robe was caught by her strange red pupils when he saw this woman for the first time, and his whole body trembled instantly. The purple-robed man glanced at the woman fearfully, and the spirit body composed of spiritual energy escaped from this strange spiritual world as fast as lightning. The purple-robed man returned to the real world with cold sweat on his forehead, and took a deep look at the pink-haired girl with closed eyes below. Just now he had a sudden glimpse of the pink-haired girl in the spiritual world, and he actually felt like he was about to be attacked by the spirit. The man in purple robe calmed down and planned to deal with the others first, and finally contact his companions to control the girl. He was also curious about what secrets were hidden in the girl's spiritual world. Thinking of this, the purple-robed man looked at Mewtwo directly below. What he saw clearly on the monitor was that this kid was an awakened person of the elemental system who used ice. It might be difficult for others to deal with it, but for him, this kind of mentally weak awakened person was the easiest to invade. His best ability is to destroy the enemy from within. This time, the man in purple robe sank all his attention into Mewtwo's inner world. He had already seen that Mewtwo had the highest combat power among the entire team, and was also the key target of the purple-robed man's trip. As usual, it is extremely easy to invade the mind of Mewtwo, an A-level awakener. According to his past experience, the more powerful the awakened person is, the more darkness and nastiness he has in his heart. A happy smile appeared on the face of the purple-robed man. He couldn't wait to see what the spiritual world of this rare elemental awakener was like. However, the moment the purple-robed man's spirit appeared in Mewtwo's heart, the purple-robed man's expression froze. What on earth is this? What greeted the man in purple robe was a brand new world that he had never seen before. The boundless sea of fire spread across the sky, and the entire sky was burned by thick fire. The hot flames surged like waves, as if the next moment this sea of fire would pour out of the Milky Way, burning everything in the world. On the ground, thousands of miles of glaciers condensed the Earth's mountains. The mountains, rivers and vegetation were all covered with ice, as if the biting ice from the North Pole was invading the entire mountains, rivers and land. But the entire world has become a dividing line, dividing the upper and lower worlds of ice and fire. It was this extremely shocking scene that made the purple-robed man stunned. He has peered into the spiritual world of countless people, but never has anyone's mind been so vast. But in the middle of this world, a magnificent throne made of gorgeous amethyst descended into this world like a god. A black-robed figure was sitting on the amethyst throne, overlooking the world, as if everything in the world were ants under his feet, looking down at the world. Behind the throne, a dark red dragon hovered around the amethyst throne. The giant dragon galloped through the world, its red eyes flashing, and there were faint flames rising and entangling as its body moved, and its roar was even more shocking and majestic. But it was such a terrifying giant dragon that wandered to the figure on the throne and lowered its majestic head, like an obedient kitten. The figure on the throne caressed the dragon's huge head, and slowly turned his head to look at the purple-robed man floating in the air in the distance. When he saw the face on the throne clearly, a deep look of horror appeared in the pupils of the purple-robed man. The figure sitting on the throne is exactly the target of his trip across the Sea of Mind, the awakener of the elemental system, Mewtwo. He didn't understand why Mewtwo's spiritual world was so vast and grand, and there was even a terrifying existence like the red giant dragon in it. The moment Mewtwo looked at him, there was a little playfulness and smile in her indifferent eyes. Cold sweat was already dripping on the purple-robed man's forehead, driving his spirit body to subconsciously escape from this heart space. But soon he discovered that his spirit body seemed to be imprisoned and could not break through this space at all. How is that possible? The purple-robed man was shocked. His previously invincible mind sea shuttle failed at this time. This situation will only happen if the opponent's strength is much higher than yours. The man in purple robe looked at Mewtwo with a horrified expression, only to find that Mewtwo, who was wearing black robe, was sitting on the amethyst throne, motionless. Mewtwo patted the red dragon's head. The red dragon looked in the direction of the purple-robed man, its red pupils seeming to be burning with an endless sea of fire. The giant dragon's eyes showed a ferocious look, roared, and danced its huge body towards the purple-robed man. No. Don't. The fragile spirit body of the purple-robed man was swallowed up and burned by the huge dragon in an instant, leaving only a wailing scream between heaven and earth. He swallowed the spirit body of the purple-robed man in one gulp. His expression was shocked, and he looked up to the sky and roared. The red dragon returned to the amethyst throne under Mewtwo's seat. Silence returned to heaven and earth, only the rolling sea of fire on the horizon made dull sounds from time to time. Mewtwo stood quietly on the throne, the world seemed to be silent, and the ferocious dragon behind him also dimmed. Seen from a distance, the black figure on the amethyst throne seems to be integrated with the red dragon, indistinguishable from each other. Don't want. Concubine Lu Qing woke up from her nightmare with a scream. There was a heavy color of palpitations in the depths of her eyes, and her heart also fluctuated violently. She touched her wet eyes, and 2 lines of clear tears were flowing down from her eyes. What's going on? Lu Qingfei had not yet recovered from the nightmare she had just had, but she saw that the team members around her also had sad expressions on their faces, and they could not stop crying tears of sadness on their faces. Even Chen Weio, the oldest member of the team, completely lost his usual calm side at this moment. He was so heartbroken that he hugged his head and cried. The fat man covered his face and fell to the ground crying. Mewtwo gently stroked Chi-Chi's pink hair. The girl understood, and a heavenly singing voice came from her red cherry mouth. The gentle singing voice echoed in the singing hall. As Chi-Chi's considerate and beautiful singing voice reached everyone's ears, the sad mood in the team was slowly disintegrating. What's wrong with us? Only then did everyone realize that what had just happened was just a terrible nightmare. Being stared at by everyone's tearful eyes, Mewtwo smiled lightly and turned to look aside. I think I can ask him this question. Everyone took a closer look, and it turned out that there was a figure lying on the ground. It was the purple-robed man from the alien church. But at this time, the purple-robed man had long lost the mysterious aura of being alone in front of hundreds of people in the hall. He was lying on his back on the ground, his eyes were dull and empty, his expression was stupid, his breathing was weak, and he could not survive. Mewtwo explained. He wanted to use his powers to invade our spiritual world, but as a result, he was not good at studying and could not control the hearts of so many people. The backlash from his powers made him look like this. Okay, I asked you how could I have been cheated on. It turns out it was this old boy who did it. The fat man cursed angrily, trotted up to the purple-robed man, and spat at him. The spirits of the others have calmed down a lot after being baptized by Keiichi's singing, but it can be seen from their red eyes that they have not completely come out of the nightmare just now. The man in purple robe is far from the level of weaving nightmares, he just leads them into the most fearful nightmare deep in his heart, but because of this, the experience given to the team is more realistic. Everyone in Mewtwo laughed and said nothing. Of course, this purple-robed man was not criticized because of his poor academic skills. The truth is that as soon as the purple-robed man entered his inner world, he was swallowed up together with his spiritual body and soul. The body left in the real world at this moment is nothing more than an empty shell without a soul. It seems that they are all innocent people being controlled. After learning the truth, concubine Lu Qing looked at the bodies of the survivors killed by Mewtwo and couldn't help but feel sad and regretful. How can there be an effect without a cause? Mewtwo did not feel any guilt about this. If these people had no evil thoughts in their hearts, how could they be so addicted to their own world that they could not extricate themselves and be controlled by the purple-robed man? After a search, this was the result. They solved a powerful psychic from the heterogeneous religion. No one knew whether this was a good thing or a bad thing. After the team members adjusted, they arrived in the hall corridor where they had originally agreed to gather. But I found that many search teams had gathered here. There are several familiar faces among them. Chu Nan, a playboy wearing a bag, Lu Qianchen, who has a charming appearance and a hot body, and several of Chen Weiguo's co-worker friends are also here. They were all lucky enough to follow the team and break through the monsters on more than 10 floors, and finally survived. They had just split up to search for survivors on this floor. But at this moment, they seemed to be quite nervous. At the same time, some search teams also caught a few people wearing black robes, who looked like they were members of the alien church. I told you to sneak attack me, you really don't want to live anymore. Chu Nan, who was wearing a pretty bag, threw a man in black robe down hard, raised his foot and kicked the man in black robe hard on the head. Chu Nan seemed to have been stimulated by something, a deep blood mark appeared on his face, and his expression became a little ferocious. If you want to die, I will do it for you. As Chu Nan's voice became colder and colder, the force of his feet became stronger and stronger. In the end, he directly kicked the heretic's head to pieces like a watermelon. The red and white ones instantly splashed all over the floor. Chu Nan's trouser legs were stained. What a bad luck! Chu Nan cursed again. Like everyone else, he was also attacked by people from the heterogeneous cult while searching for survivors. He even had scars on his face that he had always cherished. It seems that everyone else was also attacked. Weilinger glanced around, only to find that the team that originally only had a few dozen people was missing. Until now, there is no news about the missing people, and everyone already has the answer in their hearts. Mu Chu noticed, however, that the members of the heterogeneous cult captured by these search teams were all wearing black robes, and only their team encountered the cult members wearing purple robes. It seems that there are also hierarchical divisions in heterogeneous religions. Mu Chu couldn't help but lament that life was not easy, and such evil class divisions existed no matter where they were. Like the purple-robed cultist with spiritual powers just now, it is obvious that the supernatural energy has almost reached the peak of A level. The energy far exceeds that of other awakened beings, and coupled with his strange mental abilities, it can be said that there are few opponents below the S level. It's a pity that what he encountered was a being beyond S class. The men in black robes captured by these search teams were relatively weak, but they were all awakened ones who had reached B level. Ji Yufeng was followed by several subordinates of the law enforcement team standing in front of the team. The law enforcement team who are still here are almost the elite of the elite. Ji Yufeng picked up a heretic and asked, "Where are the other survivors in this building?" The corners of the pagan's mouth in black robes were cracked, revealing bloodshot teeth, with a sinister smile. They are in my belly, ha ha ha. Bang! The blade flashed, and a pistol appeared in Ji Yufeng's hand. It penetrated the head of the heretic cultist directly, and blood spurted out. Ji Yufeng's face remained as cold as ever, not even the slightest bit moved even though he was about to face the final life and death battle. He turned to look at the few members of the search team and law enforcement team in the corridor, and slowly said, "Pull up all your spirits, this is the final battle." After saying that, Ji Yufeng took the lead and stepped onto the steps in front of him that were paved with blood-soaked blankets. On the top of the steps is the top floor of this luxurious building called Daishandi Entertainment Club, and it will also be the ultimate goal of this clearing operation. The words, Medieval European Castle Experience Center, are carved in stone at the top of the wide corridor. The passage leading to the top floor of the clubhouse is particularly strange. The bright red carpet seems to be soaked in blood, and the dark walls are actually made of schist rocks. An iron door suddenly appeared in front of everyone's eyes. The iron chain on it was still rusty. At first glance, the style looked like the door of a European castle. At this moment, more than half a day has passed since everyone entered the building. After rounds of fighting, only a few dozen people were left in the original team of several hundred people. Several searcher teams and remaining members of the law enforcement team were mixed in, but most of them were scarred and looked tired. Ji Yufeng, who was walking at the front among dozens of people, had a normal expression, and even the white suit he was wearing was not dirty. What puzzles everyone is that as the most powerful white god of death in the team, no one has seen him take action along the way. If Ji Yufeng took action, he would definitely avoid the casualties of many members. This made many of the surviving searchers feel resentful about this, and the expressions on their faces were also very strange. Everyone walked to the huge iron gate. Ji Yufeng looked calm and stretched out his hand to slowly push open the heavy castle gate. Boom! After the door was pushed open, everyone saw a vast and deep hall. The entire floor was transformed into a medieval castle palace. The decoration of the main hall is really like a European castle. Even the carpets on both sides of the corridor are filled with medieval European-style elements. It is a strange portrait of pagan culture, but it depicts a terrifying heretic with an ugly face. Several pieces of steel armor stained with blood stains were particularly obvious in the hall. A row of candles were placed on the walls on both sides, making the atmosphere of the entire corridor particularly dark. In the middle of the dark hall, on the huge pillar that carries the entire club building, is a dark green ball that is hugged by several people. It is filled with smoke, as if it is filled with life. Everyone pushed open the door and walked into the hall warily. What they saw was such a strange scene. Ba bang bang. Suddenly, a burst of violent applause sounded from the deepest part of the hall. As the applause rang out, the candles on the walls of the entire hall burned fiercely, illuminating the entire empty and dark hall. Everyone was shocked. When they looked up, they saw a skeleton throne placed in the deepest part of the hall. On both sides of the throne stood more than a dozen members of the heterogeneous cult wearing robes. Several of the faces were the human survivors they had rescued before. And in front of these heretic believers, there were actually several members of the law enforcement team lying down. These members of the law enforcement team had their hands and feet cut off and fell to the ground covered in bruises, moaning helplessly in pain. I really admire you for making it this far. You are worthy of being a law enforcement team under the command of the white god of death in Yuhai. A slightly hoarse laugh came, and everyone turned their attention to the owner of the voice. The figure on the skull throne slowly stood up, and the bright candlelight reflected on the red robe he was wearing, followed by a handsome young face. The strange thing is that although the face of this young man in red robe is handsome, his complexion is sickly pale, and the corners of his eyes are also abnormally scarlet. Just by looking like this, he looks like a vampire aristocrat in a Western movie. The young man in red robe stood up and looked towards a certain direction behind the team. The smile on his face faded, and a touch of affection suddenly appeared in his eyes. Long time no see, concubine Ching, my wife. Quote. Why, how could it be you? Concubine Lu Ching, who was at the deepest part of the crowd, looked at the man in red robes on the skeleton throne, covering her mouth with disbelief in her pupils. Shu Feng, why are you here? The man in red robe on the throne of the main hall is her husband who she has been missing for 2 years and has been searching for 2 years, Shu Feng. Shu Feng, who was wearing a red robe, suddenly chuckled when he heard Lu Qingfei's unbelievable words and said, why? Then he opened his arms and laughed wildly, because the entire club is my property. How could it be? You clearly said you were on a business trip to Linan City. Lu Qingfei couldn't believe that she would meet her husband again under such circumstances. Ji Yufeng looked at the smiling man in red robe, seemed to understand something, and said, are you the leader of this alien church stronghold? Shu Feng ignored him, but with a gentle look in his eyes, he said to concubine Lu Qing, don't worry concubine Qing, you will be back with me soon. Then he looked at Ji Yufeng, who was at the front of the team, and said with a smile, the white god of death came to the club in person, which really made me wait for Pengpi to shine. There was a sinister sneer on Shu Feng's pale face. Oh, by the way, I almost forgot the gift that came to my door. As he spoke, Shu Feng opened his palms, and an invisible force attracted a member of the law enforcement team on the ground. A scene that shocked everyone appeared. In the middle of Shu Feng's open palm, there was a bloody mouth with sharp teeth. The member of the law enforcement team was attracted by Shu Feng, and the bloody mouth in his palm bit the member of the law enforcement team's neck. Veins suddenly popped up on the man's face, his eye sockets protruded, his face was filled with pain, and his body began to struggle violently. At the same time, something seemed to be passing rapidly inside the man's body, like a plant that had been drained of nutrients. Almost in the blink of an eye, the body of this strong man from the law enforcement team began to wither and lose weight rapidly, and his struggling movements also slowed down. Everyone just watched helplessly as the members of the law enforcement team were sucked into shriveled mummies. Shu Feng, who was wearing a red robe, threw down the shriveled corpse without hesitation, and a sickly color appeared on his pale face. Fresh human blood is such an extremely delicious delicacy. Everyone looked at the man on the skull throne in shock, with different expressions on their faces. Anger, hatred, surprise, fear, indifference, all kinds of different expressions appeared in the crowd. Among them, the one who had the biggest reaction was concubine Lu Qing, who was the unmarried wife of the man in red robe. Concubine Lu Qing covered her mouth and looked at the man in red robe standing deep in the hall with a satisfied look on his face. She still could not imagine that this cruel, bloody, devil-like man was the husband she had longed for. Mu Chu, who was standing in the team, looked at Xu Feng playfully, with a smile on her lips. It's a bit interesting. Unexpectedly, the final boss of this mission turned out to be Lu Qingfei's husband. This seems a bit like a bloody romance drama. Moreover, Xu Feng's superpower also made Mu Chu interesting. Vampire. Mu Chu looked at Xu Feng, the final boss wearing a red robe. If he read correctly, Xu Feng should be a mutation awakener who has awakened the vampire bat gene. The ability to enhance one's own strength by absorbing other people's essence and blood is similar to Mu Chu's swallow, but the effect is of course completely different. And Mu Chu also sensed Xu Feng's power level, it was S level above A level. However, the energy fluctuations emitted by it are very unstable, and its level is only stuck at the early stage of S level. Although the power obtained by sucking blood can quickly increase the strength, there is always a gap between it and normal superpowers. Moreover, what Xu Feng has to face now is Ji Yufeng, a veteran and powerful S-class awakener, known as the White Death. Most of the dozens of awakened members of the heterogeneous sect around Xu Feng are at the B-level level. There are dozens of such awakened members on Ji Yufeng's side. It can be said that based on the current lineup alone, there is no advantage at all for the heterogeneous religion. Mu Chu was a little curious as to what means Xu Feng planned to use to even out this extreme disadvantage. Ji Yufeng looked at Xu Feng in front of the throne indifferently. If you only have this means, you can prepare your last words in advance. I saw Xu Feng's pale face with a wild smile. Friends from Yuhai have come from afar, how can I not entertain them? After saying that, he stood in front of the hall, looked at the remaining teams, and asked, aren't you always curious about where the original survivors of this building are? Xu Feng pointed to the pagan believers beside him. All of them who are willing to join us are here. As for those who don't want to, a strange sneer suddenly appeared on Xu Feng's face. He lowered his head, waved his red robe, and slowly pressed a remote control in his hand. Everyone present suddenly noticed a certain distant sound coming from the surrounding walls. Boom! The walls around the hall were suddenly shattered by a huge force, and several tall and terrifying figures suddenly walked out from inside, attacking everyone with shocking power fluctuations. What is this? Monster. What I saw walking out of the wall were several terrifying monsters with human faces and animal bodies. The shadow of a huge spider shrouded many awakened people, its densely packed limbs were thick and powerful, and the down on the limb joints was extremely sharp. The huge body, which was several meters long, was almost touching the ceiling of the hall, and its ferocious fangs carried a cold murderous intent. The most touching and terrifying thing is the position of the head of this huge spider monster. There is a woman's head embedded in the original compound eye. The woman's originally beautiful appearance looked hideous and terrifying, her eyes were white and her hair was messy. When she faced the search team, she had a crazy murderous intent, just like an evil ghost crawling out of the abyss of hell. This is an S-class monster. Following closely behind were several huge human-faced monsters, including a fly monster with a wide back wing and a mouth full of mucus, a ferocious Tibetan mastiff with strong limbs and sharp fangs, and even a mechanical modification with a full body of steel and a strong sense of technology. People. But without exception, the heads of these monsters and heretics are all human faces with hideous and painful expressions. What's even more frightening is that the energy fluctuations emitted by these monsters far exceed those of the many awakened ones present, almost reaching S level. Looking at the monster army approaching, Ji Yufeng said coldly, you transformed them. Xu Feng had a morbid smile on his face. How? They were supposed to be the lowest level of human beings in this apocalyptic world, but now, I have given them powerful power. Xu Feng stretched out his hand and clenched his fist. This is simply a miracle of the Creator. Everyone in Yuhai, be happy, you will witness the power of these experiments before you die. Mu Chu turned to look at concubine Lu Qing, who had already burst into tears, and said with a smile, I have to say, your boyfriend is quite talented in comedy. Facing Mu Chu's teasing, concubine Lu Qing couldn't listen at all. At this moment, she looked at Xu Feng and those human-faced monsters in disbelief, her eyes full of pain and despair. She simply couldn't imagine what kind of inhumane experiments had happened on these poor survivors to have such evil expressions on their faces. And the boyfriend she had always been proud of turned out to be the human-faced demon that made them miserable. Before Xu Feng could issue an order, these hateful human-faced monsters took the lead in attacking everyone. They hate and complain about these human beings with intact bodies. These human-faced monsters who have almost lost all their reason and humanity just want to kill all the life in front of them crazily. After being transformed, they have long since become killing machines that can only destroy living things. I see, it seems that the big-headed monster baby I met in the hospital last time was also the work of the alien church. Miu-Chu stood aside and thought to herself that the big-headed monster baby was a rare and powerful heretic even in the A level. He had previously wondered why this level of heresy would appear in the suburbs, but now he got the answer here. On the other hand, these human-faced monsters showed terrifying combat power when they first appeared. Although there are many A-level awakened people on the human side, they are all scarred after several battles. In addition, these terrifying human-faced monsters are huge in size and have no fighting skills. They attack purely out of instinct and do not care about themselves at all. Injury. This made the members of the search team and law enforcement team miserable and found it difficult to withstand such a fierce offensive. Soon, several A-level awakened people could not hold on any longer and were killed and eaten by several human-faced monsters. The remaining B-level awakened ones were beaten and retreated, and several of them had their heads bitten off by the human-faced Tibetan Mastiff. The scene was extremely bloody and brutal. And the largest S-class human-faced spider waved its terrifying limbs and charged towards Ji Yufeng with a ferocious face. Ji Yufeng's body swayed and he disappeared instantly. When he reappeared, he was already in the corner of the hall several hundred meters away. Miu-Chu saw this scene from the side and narrowed her eyes slightly. Ji Yufeng took out 2 capsules from his suit pocket, drank them, and then slowly pulled out the 2 cylindrical handles on his waist. Ji Yufeng held a handle in each hand, and the supernatural energy in his arms poured into it. In an instant, 2 light blue lasers were fired from the handles. These turned out to be 2 1-meter-long laser swords. After holding the 2 laser swords, Ji Yufeng's eyes instantly became sharp. The moment Ji Yufeng held the hilt of the laser sword, the expression under his glasses instantly became sharp. A powerful wave of supernatural energy began to rise and explode around Ji Yufeng. Ji Yufeng's figure flashed, and the next moment he appeared on the head of the man-faced demon spider. Ji Yufeng had an icy cold light in his eyes. He turned his wrist holding a laser sword, and a brilliant blue arc flashed in the air. Aha! The next second, Ji Yufeng had already ducked onto the ground of the hall. All 4 limbs of the man-faced demon spider were instantly cut off by the lightsaber, and the ferocious human face roared in pain. But what was surprising next was that the severed limbs of the huge spider actually grew back at a speed visible to the naked eye, and the woman's eyes on the head began to become crimson and violent. The tail of the man-faced demon spider began to spray dark green spider silk crazily. The thick rope-like spider silk spits out on the human body, instantly corroding it into a bloody skeleton. Even the blue bricks and colorful glazed floor tiles are corroded into slender ravines. Even an A-level awakened person will turn into a rotten corpse in an instant if they get stained by this slime spider silk, which is more terrifying than sulfuric acid. This is the horror of the S-level heresy. At the same time, the human-faced demon spider began to move its limbs and rushed towards Ji Yufeng, who was standing in the distance. Ji Yufeng stood there, not afraid of the huge creature in front of him. Ji Yufeng, who was wearing a white suit, gently adjusted the rims of his glasses, with a cold and indifferent expression on his face. I saw his palm exerting force, and the laser sword he held instantly extended several feet. Immediately, the space around Ji Yufeng became distorted in an instant, and Ji Yufeng disappeared in the blink of an eye. Miu-Chu watched this scene from a distance, with surprise in her eyes. Is it teleportation? No. Ji Yufeng's movement speed was obviously several times higher than Fatty's, and even Miu-Chu's naked eyes couldn't catch Ji Yufeng's whereabouts. The power of space. Miu-Chu narrowed his eyes slightly, and the next second he saw a whirlpool suddenly appear under the belly of the running man-faced demon spider, and a figure flashed in the whirlpool. It was Ji Yufeng, the white god of death. At this moment, he finally learned about Ji Yufeng, an S-level superpower who was called the white god of death by the Yuhai base. Space shuttle. Yes, this is different from Fatty's super speed movement, nor is it like the instant movement of the rabbit charm in Miu-Chu's body. This is a powerful superpower that involves the realm of time and space. Miu-Chu finally understood why Ji Yufeng, as a human, could compete with the previous fire demon lord, relying on this powerful space power. Ji Yufeng was seen holding a foot-long laser sword in his hand, and he thrust it into the lower abdomen of the man-faced demon spider. Dark green blood spattered, and the man-faced demon spider staggered and fell to the ground with a cry. Ji Yufeng moved and stopped in midair, swinging his lightsaber to chop off the 8 limbs of the man-faced demon spider. Waste. Seeing Ji Yufeng's fierce tactics, Xu Feng, who was in front of the skeleton throne, knew that he had to make a desperate move now. He immediately ordered the dozen alien cultists around him to resist the offensive of the law enforcement team and many awakened people, and then ordered several other transformed human-faced monsters to focus their fire on Ji Yufeng. And Xu Feng's words were like gods in the ears of those human-faced monsters. Those ferocious-looking monsters actually showed a look of fear on their faces after hearing Xu Feng's order. Then they actually gave up on the human blood food in front of them, and instead collectively attacked Ji Yufeng in the distance. Looking back at the human side, although they have the upper hand in terms of numbers, after fighting for more than 10 floors, some team members have already been scarred. In addition, several high-level awakened people were killed in the battle with the human-faced monster just now. As a result, only a dozen alien cultists actually fought back and forth with these search team awakeners. An awakened member of the search team had half of his body bitten off by a Tibetan Mastiff. He was lying in a pool of blood and gasping for air, but the next second a knife flashed through and his throat was slit. The alien cult members in black robes slowly walked out with long knives in their hands, with a ghastly and bloodthirsty killing intent on their faces. Weilinger had sharp claws and nimble movements. She had just killed a heretic cultist, but another cold sword light flashed behind her. At the critical moment, a crystal blue ice arrow came speeding towards him and hit the heart of the heretic cultist behind him. Weilinger turned around hastily and saw Mu Chu, who was wearing a black windbreaker and holding an ice-long bow, smiling at her. Weilinger's heart felt warm, and she gave Mu Chu a bright smile, and then entered the battle again. Mu Chu's complexion returned to calm. She was holding a magnificent ice-long bow in her hand. She pulled the bowstring with her right hand, and a ball of dense frost slowly condensed into an ice arrow. He casually shot another heretic who was trying to attack Chi-Chi and Xu Wen. Mu Chu took a breath and no longer paid attention to the fierce fighting on the field, and turned to look at the fierce battle on the larger battlefield in the distance. This is a battle unique to the White Death. It's not so much a battle as it is a gorgeous sacrifice by the god of death to harvest life. Mu Chu could clearly see that illusory whirlpools appeared in the sky above the entire hall from time to time, and Ji Yufeng's figure was constantly wandering in and out of these spatial whirlpools. Just like the god of death seeking life in hell, holding 2 brilliant laser swords, he can survive with ease even when surrounded by several human-faced monsters. The arc of the laser in the hall kept flashing, and every time Ji Yufeng's white figure disappeared, there would be several more tragic scars on the bodies of these huge monsters. In the end, even Xu Feng, the leader, had to go into battle himself and fight against the white god of death Ji Yufeng with several experimental subjects. At this point, Ji Yufeng was able to fight off 2 S-class and several A-class powerful beings by himself. Mu Chu couldn't help but be amazed when she saw Ji Yufeng walking among the monsters. This Ji Yufeng is worthy of his title as the white god of death. He has superior strength and even more extraordinary talent. Only, the amount of supernatural energy consumed by this level of space travel must be several times that of an ordinary person. I don't know how many rounds Ji Yufeng can last. Sure enough, Ji Yufeng's fierce and rapid offensive stopped after a moment, and he stood motionless on a wall of the hall, with a layer of sweat on his forehead. On the other hand, on the side of the heterogeneous cult, several huge monsters were already covered with scars caused by laser swords. Even the limbs of the S-class man-faced demon spider were cut off at this moment, with only a small sprout of flesh regenerated. After all, they were transformed into irrational monsters. Even though their destructive power was astonishing, they could not react at all under Ji Yufeng's fast and flexible offensive, and could only be beaten passively. Xu Feng's originally blood-colored robe was soaked with another layer of blood, and his pale face showed embarrassment. He also did not expect that Ji Yufeng's strength would be so powerful, and that so many high-level monsters were no match for him. But now seeing Ji Yufeng looking exhausted, Xu Feng grinned, revealing a pair of bat-like fangs inside, and said with a sinister smile, You are indeed the white god of death in Yuhai. I can't hold on until now. It's your ability. Isn't the supernatural energy in your body almost exhausted? Ji Yufeng slowly stepped on the wall, and underneath him were the roaring monsters, as if they would swarm up and tear them apart in the next second. Hearing Xu Feng's sarcastic words, Ji Yufeng did not refute, but raised his arms, and the two gorgeous laser swords suddenly merged. Immediately, dozens of white whirlpools suddenly appeared in the space surrounding Ji Yufeng. I saw a white figure slowly walking out of each illusory whirlpool. When everyone took a closer look, these dozens of figures turned out to be Ji Yufeng. Interesting. Mu Chu rubbed her chin and looked at the dozen, Ji Yufeng, walking out of the space vortex, with a hint of emotion in her eyes. Immediately afterwards, the dozen or so, Ji Yufeng, who emerged from the whirlpool all held two lightsabers in their hands. They put their hands together and made the same movement at the same time. As the two laser swords merged, a huge blue beam shot out. Xu Feng looked at the scene in front of him in horror, and his intuition told him that there was a faint fatal threat in this laser. I saw a dozen, Ji Yufeng, holding the laser swords in their hands together at the same time, surrounding Xu Feng and many human-faced monsters, and dozens of laser giant pillars exploded together, and the final target was Xu Feng. Not good. Xu Feng's heart was shaken, and what was reflected in his pupils was dense blue light beams bombarding him directly. Boom! The earth-shattering attack shook the entire club building, like an earthquake, and the sound instantly alerted the law enforcement team and the people of the alien church who were fighting fiercely on the side. Thick smoke shrouded the hall, and the ground where several monsters were originally located had been shattered by the powerful attack, and the red tiles of the carpet on the next floor were clearly visible. After the thick smoke, a figure in a white suit floated into the sky. It's the seasonal wind. It's the captain. Seeing Ji Yufeng's appearance, everyone in the law enforcement team was shocked. But at this moment, Ji Yufeng's face was no longer calm. The laser sword in his hand was dim, and a screen of light flashed under the lens, but his eyes were looking straight at the deep pit created by the explosion directly below. Everyone looked intently and saw a huge figure rolling in the giant pit. It turned out to be the S-level man-faced demon spider. It's just that the man-faced demon spider looks extremely miserable at this moment, with dark green blood all over its body, its limbs are paralyzed, and the tail that sprays spider silk is even more anxious. This is all the result of the fierce laser cannon attack just now. On the other hand, most of the other A-level human-faced monsters were bombarded into dregs, and those who survived collapsed on the ground, with blood gushing out. Xu Feng climbed up from the man-faced demon spider's belly. Just now, he was able to withstand this fatal blow by hiding in the man-faced demon spider's chest and abdomen. Xu Feng stood up in embarrassment and looked at Ji Yufeng with a deep fear in his eyes. He then turned to look at the alien cult members who were fighting with the law enforcement team and the awakened members of the search team. There were only a few of them still alive at this moment. Okay, very good. There was an inexplicable smile on Xu Fengson's white face, which made people feel scared. Concubine Lu Qing in the crowd looked at Xu Feng blankly. She could no longer recognize that this ghastly, vampire-like monster was her former fiancé. Xu Feng looked at concubine Lu Qing affectionately. My dear, don't worry, no one can take you away from me. Don't you always want to destroy this place? Xu Feng's laughter was a bit hysterical. In that case, I will let you witness the highest masterpiece in this base. Xu Feng suddenly bent down. His back curved into a strange arc, and then, a pair of demon-like bloody wings suddenly unfolded from under the red robe. Xu Feng suddenly flew to a high altitude, took out a remote control device from his arms, and pressed it hard. He looked at Ji Yufeng and laughed wildly. White Death, rejoice, because you will witness a miracle here. As soon as Xu Feng finished speaking, suddenly, the whole building began to shake violently, as if the earth was shaking. Look at that round ball. When everyone looked around, they saw layers of cracks gradually appearing on the surface of the giant pillars that were originally used to support the entire building, and pieces of debris fell off. The green ball at the top of the giant pillar now looks more like a giant egg that breathes life, and something inside seems to be about to break out of the shell. Witness it well, this is the subject 001 that I have put all my efforts into. Ji Yufeng looked at the dark green ball, and finally there was a tremor in the corner of his eyes. Inside, he felt a powerful energy fluctuation. Just as everyone was stunned, the next moment, the dark green giant shell suddenly burst, followed by the shattering and collapse of the building's foundation pillars. What's going on? Feeling the ground shaking under their feet, everyone began to feel fearful and uneasy. Is it possible? Is it possible? The giant pillar connecting the entire building is the body of this monster. Someone saw some clues and said this fact as his throat rolled. Now this monster is going to wake up, and the whole building is going to collapse. As soon as these words came out, everyone's hearts were shocked beyond measure, and they felt their heartbeats slowed down by half a beat. The entire building is actually made up of a heretic. Xu Fengfei suddenly laughed in the air and said, "It would have taken some time to wake it up. Thanks to you guys who provided so much fresh blood after coming in, I finally woke it up." Only then did everyone realize that this was the real purpose of the heterogeneous religion in attracting them to encircle and suppress them. The zombies on every floor were all to provide nutrients for the monsters in this building. The ground beneath my feet suddenly began to crack inch by inch, and I heard the violent sounds of collapse coming from the floors below. I believe that the entire building will collapse in a few minutes. It's too late. Ji Yufeng's eyes flashed, and he swayed through space and came to the law enforcement team, and said, "Get out of here first." Ji Yufeng stretched out his hands to activate his powers, and a white light curtain enveloped everyone. He wants to use his ability to travel through space to take everyone away. Just when he was about to activate his superpower, an eerie and hoarse voice suddenly came, "Qing Fei, you are mine." The next moment, Xu Feng came out of nowhere and broke through the defense of the space barrier. With a ferocious face, he headed straight for concubine Lu Qing in the crowd. As the earth shook and the mountains shook, the green rock walls around the hall began to tremble violently. The entire building seemed to have lost its load-bearing bridge, and everyone felt that the stairs below began to crack and collapse layer by layer. What's even more frightening is that after a fierce battle, the ground was covered with human blood, and in the end, all the rivers of blood merged into the dark green ball in the center of the hall. And with the inflow of massive amounts of blood, the eggshell-like ball also accelerated its rupture speed. The halo above it flashed, and dark green energy fragments fell like eggshells. Feeling the strong energy fluctuations coming from inside, Ji Yufeng's face finally became solemn. He spent all his powers to wrap the remaining search team and law enforcement team in a white space mask. The energy in his body was consumed instantly, and Ji Yufeng's complexion turned pale at a speed visible to the naked eye. With a thought in Ji Yufeng's mind, he activated his ability to take dozens of people through space. But suddenly, a blood-colored figure suddenly broke open a gap in the space barrier he had set up, and dived straight towards one of the people in the team. "Qing Fei, my wife, I will never lose you again this time." Xu Feng, who was wearing a red robe, was seen, his face was pale, and a pair of fangs were clearly visible at the corners of his mouth. The blood-red robe was draped around his body, floating in the air like a fierce and thirsty vampire. Xu Feng. Lu Qingfei looked at her old lover in front of her, and the completely subverted image made her unbelievable that the murderous demon in front of her was her kind and upright fiancé in the past. Lu Qingfei's footsteps began to retreat involuntarily, and the long dried tears flowed down the corners of her eyes again. "No, you are not him. The Xu Feng in my heart can never be like you." Concubine Lu Qing lost her usual gentle look, and looked at Xu Feng with a strange expression. After hearing concubine Lu Qing's ruthless words denying their relationship, Xu Feng's expression instantly turned fierce. "No, you are my wife, forever. Qing Fei, come with me, I can bring you the life you want." Xu Feng's body swayed, and the bloody figure flew quickly through the air, targeting concubine Lu Qing below. This is a fierce offensive from an S-class awakener. Everyone stood ready, and several awakened people rushed forward to stop Xu Feng. I saw Xu Feng's arms stretching out from his robe, and his nails stretched and became extremely sharp, with traces of blood flashing on them. Several strong mutant-type awakened ones were pierced through the necks by Xu Feng's extended claws without even being hit. In an instant, the blood in the bodies of several awakened people drained away quickly, turning directly into shriveled corpses. Xu Feng drew out his sharp claws and rushed towards concubine Lu Qing without any hesitation. His twisted and spread fingers seemed to have declared his control over the beauty in front of him. Concubine Lu Qing looked at her husband who was getting closer and closer to her, and she couldn't help but feel extreme fear in her heart. In desperation, she subconsciously raised her arms and closed her eyes in despair. But after waiting for a moment, the familiar and crazy voice in his ears suddenly stopped. Concubine Lu Qing raised her head, only to see a slender and tall figure standing in front of her. The familiar black windbreaker fluttered, like a god, blocking Concubine Lu Qing from the horrific disaster ahead. Mu Chu. Lu Qingfei never expected that the person standing in front of her when she was desperate was this cold-blooded young man who was at odds with her ideals and even had a grudge against her. Veins popped up on Xu Feng's forehead. He looked at the double blades of ice blocking his claws, and his fangs flashed with an eerie cold light. You are looking for death. The corners of Mu Chu's lips curled up, and while blocking Xu Feng's path, she turned to look at the urban beauty behind her, and said with a smile, "This is not like your style, my great holy mother." In fact, Mu Chu just watched this family drama with the mentality of just watching the excitement, but a familiar and cold mechanical sound suddenly came in her mind, which directly shocked Mu Chu. Bite. Congratulations to the host for checking into the Daishindi Entertainment Club and unlocking the reward, Nia's Mask, which can summon the Black Shadow Core. The next check-in location is the final battle at the Redemption Battlefield, and a random devil fruit from the One Piece plane will be awarded. I hope the host will continue to work hard and the Great World Sign in system will always be with you. The cold mechanical sound fell silent again, as if everything that had just reached his ears was a fantasy. Because of this, Mu Chu, desperately, resisted Xu Feng's attack for Concubine Lu Qing. Hearing Mu Chu's usual teasing words and looking at the tall back in front of her, Lu Qingfei's eyes became moist again for some reason. Mu Chu once again looked at the vampire, who was only a few feet away from her, with an inexplicable meaning in her eyes. Now, let me play with you. The two ice blades in Mu Chu's hands suddenly thrust forward, and then with a sway, she stepped on the ice and rushed towards the far side of the hall. At the same time, Ji Yufeng also used Space Shuttle to attack Xu Feng, and many awakened members of the law enforcement team appeared in front of Lu Qingfei. Mu Chu's words seemed no less than sarcastic ridicule to Xu Feng, and he saw that the great opportunity had been lost. Xu Feng was so angry that he spread his blood wings and turned around to fly towards Mu Chu. The rock walls beside everyone began to collapse, and the masonry beneath their feet also began to collapse. Ji Yufeng looked in the direction of Mu Chu in the distance, but time was obviously not enough for him to rescue Mu Chu. With a thought in Ji Yufeng's mind, the space power is activated. I saw a white mist flashing in the space barrier that enveloped everyone, and then an illusory vortex directly swallowed everyone. Everyone felt the rapid airflow around them, and in the blink of an eye they had appeared on the floor where the zombies had been wiped out before. Similarly, the collapse of this floor of the building was more serious, with debris from the ceiling falling like meteorites. The next moment, there was another flash of white light, and everyone kept shuttling back and forth in the 10-story building. Ji Yufeng, who was leading the crowd in the space shuttle, had sweat drops on his forehead. Carrying so many people across a wide range of space, such a huge load was already too much for him to bear. Wait, Mu Chu is still inside. Wei Linger shouted at Ji Yufeng. Ji Yufeng glanced at Wei Linger with a calm expression. The middle-aged man beside him hurriedly explained, "It's too late, Yufeng's body can't hold on any longer." Wei Linger looked at the changing scenes in front of her, and her worry about Mu Chu couldn't be increased. Chi Chi stood next to Wei Linger, staring blankly in the direction upstairs. Autumn. On the other side, inside the top floor of the club that is constantly collapsing. Looking at the people who had completely disappeared, Xu Feng, who was wearing a red robe and looked like a vampire, gritted his teeth and looked at Mu Chu in front of him with murderous intent. It was all because of this man that he failed to take concubine Lu Qing away in the end. It doesn't matter, Xu Feng laughed solemnly and said, "I'll deal with you first, and I can take concubine Qing away after experiment number 1 wakes up. None of you can escape." Mu Chu suddenly smiled, still looking free and easy. "Are you so sure that you can solve me?" Xu Feng's body suddenly erupted with a powerful wave of energy, which was majestic. This is a powerful energy that can only be possessed by S-class beings. The supernatural energy in Xu Feng's body was stimulated to the extreme. He suddenly flung away his blood-red robe, and the clothes underneath exploded, revealing a pair of strong and muscular muscles with explosive power like a wild beast. This is the powerful body supported by the blood essence he absorbed. Mu Choja was amazed that this body alone was comparable to, or even better than, the previous Jin Chong who had unparalleled strange power. Shu Feng looked at Mu Chu, with a bloodthirsty look in his eyes, and said with a ferocious smile. Don't worry, I won't kill you immediately. I will keep you in captivity and become my blood food. Zhen, I have never tasted the taste of the blood of the elemental awakener. Mu Chu lowered her head and murmured, I don't want you to beg for it, let me see what's so special about you. Shu Feng suddenly saw that the corners of Mu Chu's lowered mouth suddenly opened in a strange arc, and the black robe behind him moved without any wind. Then he muttered with a hint of excitement, please me, Aunt. An unimaginable and shocking wave suddenly rose into the sky like a raging wave. The entire building even accelerated the process of collapse because of this extremely powerful energy fluctuation. This is. Shu Feng's eyes widened. He suddenly discovered that this powerful wave that made his soul tremble suddenly appeared on Mu Chu in front of him. At the same time, the remaining members of the search team and the law enforcement team kept shuttling through the space mask condensed by Ji Yufeng. After just a dozen breaths, everyone arrived outside the club building. Ji Yufeng then manipulated the space mask to lead everyone forward a few hundred meters, and then lifted the huge space barrier. At this time, Ji Yufeng's face was extremely pale, and his forehead was soaked with sweat. The chest of the white suit rose and fell rapidly. Ji Yufeng covered his chest and gasped for breath. In just a dozen short breaths, every second was squeezing the little energy in his body. And just a few seconds after everyone reached the ground safely, the tall building hundreds of meters behind them also collapsed in an instant. The loud sound of building collapse echoed throughout the city center, instantly attracting the attention of a large group of zombie heretics in the surrounding area. Then, what is that? Before everyone could recover from the aftermath of the disaster, some survivors were already pointing at the collapsed building behind them and exclaimed. I saw a towering tree rising from the collapsed building, reaching a height of more than 10 feet into the sky. The whole body of the giant tree is a strange dark green color, and there are no leaves on the branches. Instead, there are layers of thick vines like tentacles. Right in the center of the tree trunk, there was a terrifying wide vertical eye. It suddenly opened and looked straight at the many survivors below. The newly born creature is extremely eager for this kind of blood food full of vitality. Astonishing power fluctuations came, and the middle-aged man beside Ji Yufeng breathed a sigh of relief, but the cautious look on his face was still strong. It hasn't reached the level of destruction yet, but based on the level of supernatural energy this monster has, it is also at the top level of S level. It's really extreme. This heterogeneous religion actually plans to use the resources of the entire Lannan city to create a destructive level being. It hasn't reached the level of destruction yet. This means that everyone still has a glimmer of hope for survival. Ji Yufeng nodded but did not speak. At this moment, a monster-like roar came from behind everyone. It's zombies. So many zombies. Everyone turned around suddenly and saw that a large number of zombie monsters had gathered behind them at some point. The dense crowds of people were rushing towards the survivors. They were all attracted by the sound of the building collapsing. In an instant, the human camp fell into the embarrassing situation of being surrounded on all sides and being attacked from both sides. Looking at the survivors who looked slumped and fell into despair, Ji Yufeng made an astonishing move. I saw him taking out a copper box from his arms, which contained capsule-shaped medicine. Seeing this box of medicine, the middle-aged man next to Ji Yufeng exclaimed, Yufeng, are you crazy? You have already taken this drug once before. If you continue to take it, your body will not be able to bear the load. Hearing the middle-aged man's threatening words, Ji Yufeng took out a few capsules and swallowed them without hesitation. In an instant, veins popped up on Ji Yufeng's forehead, and a look of pain appeared on his face. Ji Yufeng endured the strong discomfort in his body and took out the two already dimmed laser sword hilts from his waist. He took out two blue crystal cores from his arms and stuffed them into the lower end of the sword hilt. Holding the hand firmly, the two laser swords once again flashed with dazzling light. The moment he held the hilt of the sword, the light curtain in Ji Yufeng's glasses flashed away, and his eyes became as sharp as an eagle's. The scene returned to the 14-story building that was on the verge of collapse a few minutes ago. Rubble flew everywhere, and the collapsed boulders poured crazily towards the floor tiles. Xu Feng, whose body was withered, fell to the ground. His chest was penetrated by a giant icicle, and his abdomen was scorched black by flames, as if it would fall apart into a piece of dust when the wind blew. Xu Feng looked horrified, the horror in his eyes was almost overflowing, and there was blood dripping from his mouth. How is it possible? How can humans have such power? Monster, you are the real monster. He never imagined that as a vampire, he would one day be sucked dry and devoured by others. Next to him, a man in a black trench coat walked slowly past, not caring about the gravel that was constantly collapsing all around. Mu Chu turned a deaf ear to Xu Feng's frightened and shocked words and strolled to a wall of the main hall. The walls are covered with masks used in masquerades. And right in the center of these masks, a mask that was as ferocious as a demon but familiar to Mu Chu came into view. Finally found you. A demon mask with 2 horns and a red face and fangs appeared in Mu Chu's hands. Nia's mask is one of the masks incarnated by the 9 ghost generals in the Shadow Corps. The person who wears this mask will be controlled by the soul of the ghost general sealed in it, inducing the wearer to release the darkness deep in his heart and summon the soldiers belonging to the Shadow Corps. And Nia's mask can summon the most common ninja group among the Black Shadow Corps. The Holy Lord once fought in all directions with this mask, and the ninja group also made immortal military exploits for the Holy Lord, an ancient demon. Now, this mask is in Mu Chu's hands. Because the anime, The Adventures of Jackie Chan, does not exist in this parallel world, Mu Chu is not worried that the mask will be recognized. After examining the ferocious mask in his hand for a while, Mu Chu smiled and shook her head. If we didn't know that there was a ghost general from the Shadow Kingdom sealed in it, on the surface it would just be a scary prop for Halloween. The surrounding walls began to collapse rapidly, and rubble on the ceiling flew and fell. Mu Chu was standing in the center of this earthquake. The first thing Mu Chu did after getting the mask was not to put it on her face, but to slowly walk to the figure lying on the ground in the distance. Faint footsteps came from the front. The haggard Xu Feng reluctantly opened his heavy eyes, but what he saw was Mu Chu's handsome face with a smile. I'm more curious, how did you, who was upright in front of Mother Lu, become like this? Or is the heterogeneous church really so attractive? Mu Chu knelt down and rubbed his eyes with one hand, with a playful look on his face. The surrounding rocks that hit him were all deflected by a thick ice wall without exception. Xu Feng's throat rolled. He was at the end of his strength now. Even speaking in this state required all his energy. Do you know what I've been through in the past 2 years? Xu Feng's face had long since turned into that of a normal person, and a wry smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. In this wasteland, I have seen people bullying others, killing others, and eating others. Human nature in this cruel apocalypse is far more terrifying than zombie monsters. Xu Feng's pupils widened, as if he saw something he longed for, and he stretched out his hand to grab the void. Only with real power can we survive here. I want to survive, I want to bring a better life to concubine Cheng, and I want to become the true king of this area. Xu Feng grinned and said with a wry smile, the church of foreign origin, I don't care what kind of cult it is, as long as it can give me power over all living beings, I can help it do things. Mu Chu smiled. You see clearly, but unfortunately, you still lost in the end. Xu Feng was not unjustly defeated at the hands of Mu Chu, the corpse king who ruled the entire territory. Yeah, I lost completely. At this time, Xu Feng seemed to have returned to his original appearance, the upright and kind-hearted husband that Lu Qingfei said. Now I am no longer worthy of being concubine Qing's husband. I hope you can take good care of her. It turned out that when Xu Feng saw Mu Chu stepping forward to save Lu Qingfei, he thought that Lu Qingfei was already Mu Chu's woman. You seem to have misunderstood something. I have nothing to do with that Madonna Lu. Mu Chu was a little dumbfounded. The reason why he came forward just now was entirely because of the appearance of the system. He took this opportunity to stay in order to get the mask. But Xu Feng turned a blind eye to Mu Chu's words. It was obvious that he no longer wanted to say anything more about the relationship between the two. Experimental subject No. 001 was cultivated with all my efforts. Its strength is at the top of the S class. Protect concubine Cheng. Suddenly, Shu Feng laughed at himself again. That's right. With your strength, my worries are unnecessary. Looking at Shu Feng talking to himself, black lines appeared on Mu Chu's forehead. This was the first person to make Mu Chu speechless. Well, Mu Chu decided to name him Shu Dazui. But Shu Feng's voice became weaker and weaker. Linan City was originally the territory of a destructive-level terrorist existence. We reached an agreement with her to establish a stronghold here. Be careful with her. When he said this, the focus in Shu Feng's eyes had completely dimmed. I saw him stretching out his knuckled hands to grab the air, and said hoarsely in a weak voice, I'm not willing to give in. This, the end of the world. Shu Feng's raised head dropped completely, with a look of deep attachment and unwillingness still remaining in his pupils. Looking at Shu Dazui, who was completely breathless, Mu Chu slowly stood up. At the same time, he also took back the palm that exuded the healing aura of the horse charm. Shu Feng's condition has long been exhausted. If Mu Chu had not used the healing power of the horse charm to extend his life, the former would not have been able to say so many last words. For Mu Chu, there are certainly many ways to treat Shu Feng. However, it can be saved, but it is not necessary. After all, it's Shu Dazui. After sending Shu Dazui away, Mu Chu lowered her head and looked at the red mask in her hand. Ghost General, then let me see how powerful it is. Mu Chu opened her 5 claws and took the mask, gently covering it on her face. In an instant, a strong black energy visible to the naked eye spread out from the ferocious mask. Mu Chu's figure also grew several times in size in an instant, and a pair of demon-like black wings broke through the wide windbreaker and spread out from his back. These demon-like broad wings were exactly the ability he got after devouring Shu Feng's superpower. The skin on Mu Chu's surface also slowly climbed up, and the red lines continued to spread. Even Mu Chu's eyes gradually turned red, and a dragon's tail vaguely appeared behind him. This is the time to transform into the Fire Lord. Following the changes in Mu Chu's body, the black energy emitted from the mask became more and more intense, and finally the black energy filled with dark power spread directly throughout the entire floor. Jia Jia Jia. At the same time, a gloomy voice came from Mu Chu's mind. A tall figure wearing warrior armor appeared in Mu Chu's mind. There is a hideous demon mask on his face, and it is the evil soul sealed in the mask, Niga, the leader of the ninja group, one of the 9 ghost generals. General Nia is resurrected. Eerie sounds echoed in the dark space. Nia opened his red eyes from the darkness, and he couldn't wait to devour those dark souls. Young man, do you long for power? Nia slowly walked out of the darkness, the words in his mouth were seductive. Strength. Suddenly, a more gloomy voice echoed in this dark space. Before Nia could recover, he saw a monster several feet tall, with a red body and a dragon head and body walking out of the darkness. The power of ants. The Fire Lord's voice was thick and low, and his tone was full of disdain and contempt. You are. Nia looked at the daunting Fire Demon Lord, his red eyes were horrified and his voice was trembling. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.